Chapter 637, Library of Yellow's path to think that despite her standing as a princess and her beautiful appearance, the other party would actually ignore her entirely and walk away. Could a person like him even be called a man? Fine, we'll talk here then. Fearing that the other party would walk away once more, Princess Faya gritted her teeth and began talking telepathically. I didn't know of your aptitude in deciphering stone pillars and lost to you. On that, I've nothing much to say. I did lose the bet fair and square, and I'm willing to acknowledge them. However, I wish to propose another wager. Do you dare accept it? Given this fellow's shameless face, how could she have ever expected for him to be a master teacher of such astounding capability? She was willing to acknowledge her loss in the bet, but what angered her was the other party's demand afterward. If she didn't rid herself of this master-servant relationship soon, who knew when would this fellow suddenly go insane and command her to serve him wine or massage his legs? Her pride as her princess would never allow her to do such things. If that was going to be the case, she might as well commit suicide this very instant. You still want to wager with me? Seeing how this lady refused to give up, even going to the extent of proposing another bet, Zhongxian stopped and turned to look at her with a peculiar expression. As a maid, what rights do you have to propose a wager against me? Also, are you sure you have the capital to do so? You. Princess Faya glared at Zhongxian with eyes burning with rage. If not for this fellow being a master teacher and winning a wager against her, she would have just smacked him to death. All right, if you don't have anything else, I'll be taking my leave. It's already late at night, and I'm exhausted. I don't have the strength to be playing with you. Waving his hands casually, Zhongxian continued walking toward the living quarters of Hongfeng Empire. However, barely after taking 2 steps, a gust of air carrying a slight aroma suddenly blew behind him. The 6th princess had rushed forward and blocked his path yet again. Due to her rage, her chest was expanding and contracting rapidly, seemingly intent on squeezing their way through her dress. Stop it right there. She waved her hands and Zhenqi immediately gushed into the air, forming a wall. Just because I refused your bet, you decide to force me into it. Despite being a maid, you tried to lay your hands on your master. Don't you have any basic etiquette? Seeing the lass getting anxious, Zhongxian chuckled lightly. I've paid you 700 spirit stones to redeem myself for 10 days. At the moment, I'm not considered as your maid. Harumphing coldly, Princess Faya waved her hands. If you provoke me any further, as your senior, surely it is within my rights to teach a junior a lesson. The top 10 of the respective master teacher tournaments were all given the opportunity to study at Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy. As a grade 2 student, Princess Faya could be considered as Zhongxian's senior. Going by this logic, it was indeed acceptable for her to teach Zhongxian a lesson. After which, Princess Faya closed her hands, grabbing at the surrounding air. She was simply too enraged at the fellow before her. No matter what, she was determined to teach this fellow a lesson today so that he would know some manners. Voila! Through the might of a transcendent mortal 6-dan Cosmos Bridge Realm Cultivator, the surrounding spiritual energy seemed to be drawn in by a bridge, forming a tight barrier that isolated the duo from the world. She was clearly embarrassed at laying her hands on the other party after losing a bet. Thus, she sealed the space so that no one saw it. It's indeed nothing much to teach one's junior a lesson, but, are you sure you want to do this? Seeing the other party seal the space, Zhongxian glanced at her with a bizarre gaze. It was just a moment ago that he pummeled a bunch of consonant spirit realm cultivators into shouting for their parents. This lady should be well aware that his true fighting prowess was far beyond clarifying turbidity realm. To intend to lay her hands on him before such uncertainty, she must be very confident in her strength. Stop spouting useless stuff. I'll make sure you obediently have this bet with me. Harumphing coldly, Princess Faya rushed up to Zhongxian and thrust a palm at him. Voila! Zhenqi gushed forth furiously from her palm and formed an intangible horizontal umbra-like barrier, sealing all possible path of escape for Zhongxian. No matter where he tried to escape to, he would only crash into a wall of Zhenqi. Spirit High-Tier Battle Technique, Seal of the Golden Umbrella. Not only did this technique seal space, it also sealed a person's Zhenqi as well, thus limiting one's mobility. On top of that, it was also tinged with the might of one's soul, causing one's opponent to feel immense lethargy. It seemed she knew that even though her junior may seem weak on the surface, his fighting prowess was astonishing. As such, she immediately executed her strongest attack at the very start of the battle. Zhong Xian's soul had been tempered by his cultivation of the Heaven's Path soul art. Even a transcendent mortal 8-dan expert couldn't phase his soul, so how could he possibly be afraid of the other party's attack? Swiftly flipping through the book compiled on the other party's floor in the Library of Heaven's Path, Zhong Xian shook his head and stomped his feet on the ground. Voila! Under the might of the stomp, a crack swiftly crept across the ground, causing Princess Feyers to lose her balance. This caused the trajectory of her palm to shift slightly, thus creating an opening for Zhong Xian to avoid her attack. With a slight tilt of his body, Zhong Xian dodged the other party's palm. Following which, he clenched his fist tightly and immediately counterattacked with a punch. While the other party was a Cosmos Bridge Realm cultivator, she was still at primary stage. Given that the combined might of Zhong Xian's soul cultivation and Zhenqi cultivation far surpassed the other party's strength, it was hard to tell who would win at this point. Not expecting the other party to deal with her seal of the Golden Umbrella with just a simple stomp, Princess Feyre was taken aback. But even so, she recovered quickly and swiftly returned the other party's fist with another palm strike. A head-to-head collision. In her view, no matter how powerful the fellow before her was, he was only a clarifying turbidity realm pinnacle cultivator. As a Cosmos Bridge realm cultivator, she couldn't possibly lose to the other party. Peng! The collision of the two fists jolted Zhong Xian's body, and he was forced to retreat several steps to nullify the force. On the other hand, while Princess Feyre managed to stand her ground, her face was filled with horror as though she had seen a ghost. She had put her full might behind her battle technique, and she thought that the sheer force would inflict grievous injuries and send the other party flying several dozen meters. Who knew that he would be completely unscathed after taking several steps back? Was he really at clarifying turbidity realm? Why did he seem no weaker than her, a Cosmos Bridge realm primary stage cultivator? While she was overwhelmed with shock, Zhong Xian shook his head. Seems like it's time to upgrade my Heaven's Path fist art. His Heaven's Path fist art was flawless and invincible among those of the same tier, but its might was severely limited by the tier of fist art manuals that he collected. While he could easily destroy a spirit low-tier battle technique with his current tier of Heaven's Path first art, it was hard for him to match up to a spirit high-tier battle technique. It was just like how even though a genius in a first grade could achieve full marks even in the hardest exams each time, he might not even pass an average 7th grade exam. Heaven's Path battle techniques were indeed formidable, but they still had its limitations, especially against battle techniques of a far higher tier than it. As such, despite his strength being superior to the other party, he was still forced back. But even so, with this collision, he also got a good grasp on the other party's strength, and he could confidently say that it would be extremely difficult for the other party to defeat him as well. Humph! Seeing how her younger junior was actually able to stand on equal grounds as her, Princess Feyre harumphed coldly and charged forward once more. This lass! The other party's attacks gradually became faster and more forceful, but at the same time, more reckless as well, as though she had become desperate. Zhong Xian shook his head. Aiming right at a flaw, Zhong Xian raised his foot and kicked straight at the other party's chest. You! Shameless! Seeing that the other party was going to attack her chest, Princess Feyre cried in anger. She subconsciously cowered backward, causing the divergence in the attack she had just launched. Naturally, yet another flaw appeared with this mistake. Who? Her palm, which should have struck Zhong Xian, ended up striking thin air. Panicked, she quickly looked around, but the young man had already vanished from her sight. What? Where did he go? In the blink of an eye, the other party simply vanished from her sight. Taken aback, she quickly tried to look around when her eyes suddenly narrowed. She hurriedly turned around. However, it was already too late. As the other party's feet connected with her bottom, she felt a dull ache there. Who? With a cry of pain, she flew 20 meters into the air before falling back to the ground. The impact from the fall had created some tears in her elegant clothes, and her face was covered in mud. At this moment, rather than a princess, she seemed more like a beggar instead. You hooligan! Princess Faya cried. Carrying the royal bloodline, the others wouldn't even dare to defy her words, needless to say, disrespect her. And yet, this fellow kicked her chest to push her away, and making use of the chance in the opening of her Junshi barrier, he maneuvered to her back and kicked her bottom. The heck? Don't you know that a lady's chest and bottom are not to be hit? And yet, you actually struck the both of them consecutively. How much more shameless can you get? The stinging pain on her bottom left her both embarrassed and enraged. Pressing against the ground, she immediately got to her feet and charged forward in a rampage. At this moment, her anger had already turned into frenzy. But before she could reach the other party had sent yet another kick toward her. Upon seeing where the kick was headed for, Princess Faya's lips twitched violently. The trajectory and timing of the kick were precisely timed to seal off her attack. If she were to continue charging on, she would definitely crash into the other party's kick. Furthermore, as well as most importantly of all, the region where the kick was headed for was once again her chest. You thug. Gritting her teeth tightly, Princess Faya thrust her palm against the ground instead, and making use of the momentum, she leaped into the air. Just as she was considering how she should launch her next attack, she felt yet another stinging pain on her bottom. You. Who? Once again, she was sent flying and fed another mouthful of soil. This time, she crashed much more heavily, and her clothes were torn even more badly. Her face and hair were completely covered with mud. Can't you fight fairly? Princess Faya was on the verge of tears. As a man, you shouldn't bully a lady like that. To kick 2 times consecutively on the bottom, how am I supposed to face others in the future? Don't you have the slightest morals or etiquette as a master teacher? If I were to say that I didn't do it intentionally, would you believe me? While she was on the verge of tears, cold sweat was also flowing down Zhong Xian's back. While he did possess strength superior to the other party, he was still at a significantly disadvantageous position due to his lower cultivation. Both his speed and reflexes were far beneath those of the other party. Thus, he had no choice but to move according to the flaws listed on the Library of Heaven's Path. But the attacking regions that the Library of Heaven's Path reflected just had to be the other party's chest and bottom. Zhong Xian scratched his head awkwardly. Did he use the wrong library this time around? Could he have accidentally accessed the Library of Yellow's Path instead? Fine. I'll have a wager with you, all right? Frustrated, Zhong Xian could only resign himself. He was better off accepting the wager than continuing with the fight. Otherwise, it wouldn't be long before the other party's clothes were completely ripped and the stinging pain on her bottom prevented her from walking. And if this were to be made known to others, he would die of embarrassment. Wager. Princess Faya's lips twitched as tears flowed down her cheek. This is no longer a matter about having a wager or not, all right? Chapter 638 Unlucky Wu Zhen 1. Seeing the 2 clear footprints on the lady's bottom, Zhong Xian said awkwardly, if we were to continue fighting, I fear that you might sustain more severe injuries. Let's just forget about it. I'll wager with you whatever you have in your mind. He wouldn't be a match for the other party in a normal battle, but if he were to continue resorting to the Library of Heaven's Path, who knew what kind of awkwardness would evolve from it? He already felt embarrassed kicking the other party twice on the bottom. Even if his skin was thick, he couldn't bring himself to do it anymore. All right. While Princess Faya was so angry that she could tear out her hair at this very instant, she knew that she would be the one in a disadvantageous position should the fight continue. Thus, she took a deep breath and nodded. But even so, the flames in her pitch-black eyes continued to blaze, seemingly searing the hateful man with her gaze. Since we're both heading to the cleansing lake tomorrow, let's have a wager on it, Princess Faya said. That's fine by me. How do you want to do it? Zhong Xian asked. You should be aware that the lake eyes of the cleansing lake have a limited pool of spiritual energy. In truth, the 3 days limit given is only a rough estimation. Due to the differing cultivation speed of different cultivators, those entering the cleansing lake will be given a spirit cleansing incense. Princess Faya continued, saying, the spirit cleansing incense can detect the concentration of the spiritual energy in the lake eye, and it will burn down at differing rates depending on the rate of depletion of spiritual energy. An average rate is 1 incense a day, so the 3 days estimate approximates to 3 incense sticks. Regardless of which lake one was in, once the 3 incense sticks burn out, one must leave its premises immediately. Given that there's a fixed amount of spiritual energy in each lake and that every cultivator had a different rate of cultivation, the approximation of 3 days wouldn't hold for everyone. As such, a more accurate way of detecting the depletion of spiritual energy in the lake was required so that the cultivators inside wouldn't be exposed to danger, the spirit-cleansing incense. These incenses would start burning immediately once they are put inside the cleansing lake, and based on the rate of depletion of spiritual energy in the lake they could burn down at differing paces. Once 3 incense sticks had burned out, one had to leave immediately. This was a rule that had been set long ago, and no one was allowed to break it. This had been explained back at the banquet, so Zhongxian knew about it too. So, our wager is very simple. Tomorrow afternoon, we'll enter the cleansing lake at the same time, and whoever's spirit-cleansing incense burns out first will be the winner, Princess Fei said. Whoever's spirit-cleansing incense burns out first will be the winner? Not expecting this to be the wager, Zhongxian was taken aback. The rate at which the spirit-cleansing incense burned down was proportionate to the rate of one's absorption of the spiritual energy the lake and to absorb the spiritual energy from the lake swiftly, a strong soul was required. To put it simply, the stronger one's soul was, the faster one's spirit-cleansing incense would burn. As a Cosmos Bridge realm expert, the other party's soul had undergone the nourishment in the consonant spirit realm. Clearly, the other party was taking advantage of Zhongxian for possessing a cultivation of only clarifying turbidity realm and thus having a weaker soul than her. Just that. She would have never imagined that she was gravely mistaken. Not only was his soul not weak, it was far stronger than hers. Having cultivated the Heaven's Path soul art, his soul could already operate independently from his body. In a battle of absorption of spiritual energy from the cleansing lake, not even a transcendent mortal 8-dan expert would be a match for him. Are you certain you want to wager on this? Zhongxian looked at her with pity. With such a wager, she was destined to lose. Indeed. Why? You were still so gleeful a moment ago. Are you chickening out now? Princess Fei spoke confidently. This. Zhongxian scratched his head. Fine, let's talk about the bets then. Simple. If I win, I'll no longer be your maid anymore, and I won't owe you any spirit stones either. On the other hand, if you win, I'll pay you another 10,000 spirit stones, or remain your maid for another 5 months. How about it? Princess Fei said. Remain my maid for another 5 months. There's no need for that. Zhongxian shook his head without any hesitation. Honestly, he didn't need a maid at all. Needless to say, he definitely didn't need a proud princess like the other party. Back then, he had only raised the matter to get even with the other party. In terms of practicality, spirit stones were definitely far superior. Hearing the other party shooting down her offer, Princess Fei gritted her teeth in anger. What else do you want? Do you expect me to marry you? Marry me? Zhongxian was stunned. You wish. You. Princess Fei grabbed her hair in a frenzy. There were countless master teachers in the Master Teacher Academy who were dying to win her fancy, and yet this fellow actually scorned at the thought of being married to her. Who do you think you are? I don't need you to become my maid for another 5 months, just give me 10,000 spirit stones if you lose. Zhongxian waved his hands. Fine, that's a deal. With clenched jaws, Princess Fei stomped away. She really couldn't stand talking to this fellow for a second longer. She feared that she might just suffer a heart attack on the spot and die. Sneaking through the premises, she managed to reach her living quarters without being seen when Luo Chichi suddenly walked up to her. Upon seeing her unkempt state, the other party was dumbfounded. What happened? At the current moment, Princess Fei's clothes were ripped at several parts, revealing her snowy skin. Her hair and face had clumps of mud sticking onto it, as though she had been rolling on the ground. She looked extremely scruffy at this current moment. It's nothing much. I suffered some injuries, so I might need you to apply some recovery medicine to me later on, Princess Fei said. She lost a bet fair and square, and yet she went to confront the other party and even attacked him. It would still be fine if she succeeded, but she ended up being beaten up instead. Even her bottom had swollen up due to being kicked. She would rather die than tell anyone of this shameful affair. "You're injured." Luo Chichi frowned. "Who did it?" "I said that I'm fine. Just apply the medicine for me." Princess Feia's face flushed. "All right." Seeing that the other party was unwilling to talk about it, Luo Chichi didn't push on either. "If it's superficial wounds, I happen to have a bottle of blood willow balm forged by Dean Lu of the apothecary school. It is exceptionally effective on external wounds, so it should get you healed up for tomorrow's cleansing lake." "There's no need for that. Wu Zhen just gave up a bottle of Saint Recovery medicine. He said that it can heal any external wound, no matter how severe, within moments. Help me apply some." Princess Feia flicked her wrist and took out a wine gourd. While she was a little embarrassed to have the other party apply the medicinal wine on her, especially on her bottom, it was much better than suffering and limping around. "Saint Recovery medicine?" Luo Chichi was taken aback. "UN. It's said to be a gift from one of the vassal states. They tested it out on the spot and it was shown to be extremely effective. Even a bleeding wound can be healed instantly with it," Princess Feia said. "He insisted that I should accept it. Let's see whether it lives up to the rumors then. There's actually such a formidable medicine." Luo Chichi commented in awe as she entered the room with Princess Feia. But not too longer later, a shout of agony reminiscent of a pig being butchered echoed out of their room. Following which, Princess Feia's furious howl echoed across the entire mansion. "Ah! Wu Zhen, to hell with you." With a doubtful expression, Wu Zhen looked out from his door. "Who called for me?" After parting with Princess Feia, Zhongxian returned to his own room. He took out the Glacier Rain sword and had it acknowledge him as its master. Giving the sword a try, he found it to be very handy. After which, he put the sword away, sat down, and began conditioning his body to recuperate from the immense exertion from the previous 2 battles a moment ago. But soon, perhaps it was the exhaustion from flying for more than a month catching up with him, he soon fell into a deep sleep. When he finally opened his eyes once more, it was already daylight. As soon as he walked out from his room, Luo Xian and Bai Jianghai immediately walked up to him with an agitated expression which reflected both excitement and gratitude. After returning back to their rooms last night, they immediately consumed the consonant spirit pill given to them and successfully achieved a breakthrough to consonant spirit realm intermediate stage. While it was only one small cultivation realm, their souls had become much stronger, and their zhenqi had grown denser as well. And all of this was thanks to the young man before them. After eating breakfast, Hongsha walked over and said, "Let's go to the royal palace. The cleansing lake is opening today, so we'll have to hurry." Hongfeng Empire had performed exceptionally in deciding the distribution of slots this time around, crushing the other 3 vassal states. This had left him excited and motivated. The royal palace was much grander and larger than the Crown Prince's Eastern Palace. Its resplendent design carried a strong hint of authority which brought out a solemn atmosphere in the area. Those who entered would find a pressure pressing down against them, inducing deference in them. Under the lead of 2 eunuchs, they walked into the main hall of the royal palace. Luo Zhao, Feng Yu, and the others had already arrived at this point. After a night of recuperation, everyone seemed to look much better. However, if one were to take a closer look, the swelling and wounds were still visible. While one's physical body would grow stronger along with the rise in one's cultivation, one's recovery ability would slow in contrast. While they did possess precious recovery medicine, its effectiveness paled far in comparison to Zhongxian's zhenqi, which could heal any wounds instantaneously. What's with that fellow? It wasn't surprising to see injuries on them, but there was one who did leave Zhongxian a little taken aback. For some reason, Wu Zhen, who had sat beside the crown prince last night and accepted everyone's gifts, had a black eye on his face. There were distinct hints of swelling which indicated that he had suffered a vicious beating by someone last night. Given that he was a talented student of the Master Teacher Academy, a figure whom even Emperor Yi Wentian and Crown Prince Yi Qian had to regard with the utmost respect, who would dare to lay their hands on him, not to mention, reduce him to such a tragic state? Zhongxian wasn't the only one who was surprised by the turn of events. Perplexed gazes from the others in the main hall would fall on him from time to time as well. At that moment, Wu Zhen noticed Zhongxian and stomped over angrily. Zhongshe, I have something I would like to ask you. Paying respect to Wu Shi, Zhongxian clasped his fist. Don't give me this nonsense. Tell me, what's wrong with this medicinal wine? Flicking his wrist, Wu Shi took out the wine gourd angrily. While this fellow claimed that this was a gift from Hongshi, he could tell that Zhongshe was surely involved in this matter. This medicinal wine? Zhongxian froze for a moment before coming to a realization. You used it. This medicinal wine was in fact just plain white wine. The only reason why it could heal injuries previously was due to him infusing his zhenqi in. But as time passed, the zhenqi would slowly dissipate, and thus, the healing property would gradually fade. It seemed like this fellow had used it and it was ineffective. I wasn't the one who used it, but it's completely ineffective. The more Wu Zhen thought about it, the angrier he felt. When he heard the sixth princess calling for him yesterday, he excitedly ran over, thinking that the other party wanted to reward him for giving her the medicinal wine. Who knew that he would only be viciously beaten up instead? Only then did he realize that the medicinal wine was completely ineffective. The more he thought about this matter, the more furious he felt. Thus, he stomped straight up to Zhongxian as soon as he saw him. How could it be ineffective? Let me take a look. Alright, since your face is injured, why don't you give it a try? How could Zhongxian possibly admit to it, especially given how angry the other party was? Thus, grabbing hold of the medicinal wine, he shook it and infused a surge of zhenqi into it. Give it a try. Wu Zhen thought that the other party would surely tremble in fear upon being confronted, but seeing the calmness on the other party's face, he frowned. Yuan, here. Passing the medicinal gourd over, Zhongxian said. Since you doubt its effectiveness, you should try drinking it. Chapter 639 Unlucky Wu Zhen to drink it? Wu Zhen was taken aback. Shouldn't this medicinal wine of yours be applied externally? Last night, when Bai Shi's arm was stabbed by a dagger, his injuries healed just by applying the medicinal wine externally. Since that was the case, why was he so special that he needed to consume the medicinal wine then? Depending on the type of injury, one needs to either apply it externally or consume it. If one chooses the wrong method, not only will it be ineffective, it might even worsen the injury. Zhongxian casually explained. Since there wasn't much medicinal wine left in the gourd, Zhongxian decided to push on with the story. In any case, by the time the other party realized that something was wrong, the medicinal wine would have already finished, so any investigation done was bound to end inconclusive. There's such a matter. Wu Zhen was in disbelief. You did see me use the medicinal wine last night, and it was extremely effective. The only plausible explanation to its ineffectiveness is that you must have used it wrongly, Zhongxian said without the slightest hint of embarrassment on his face. Like you said, you weren't the one using it. Most probably, the person who used the medicinal wine must have been confused between the two, resulting in the ineffectiveness of the medicinal wine. Is that the case? Wu Zhen was still slightly doubtful. Please, take a sip. Zhongxian smiled. All right then. If it proves to be ineffective, just wait and see how I take care of you. Harumphing coldly, Wu Zhen picked up the wine gourd and took a sip. As soon as the wine flowed down his throat, he immediately felt a warm surge of energy flowing through his bloodstream across his entire body. A moment later, the aching and swelling disappeared without a trace. This. Wu Zhen's eyes widened in disbelief. Only upon trying it personally did he realize how incredible this saint recovery medicine was. He was beaten up to a pathetic state last night, and he had tried applying the medicinal wine to his injuries, but it was completely ineffective. In the end, he had to use his own recovery medicine, but due to its limited effectiveness, he wasn't able to make a full recovery. As such, here he was in the royal palace with a swollen eye. Thus, he thought that Zhongshe's saint recovery medicine was a fake, but who knew that it would possess such astounding healing ability? Within moments of consuming the saint recovery medicine, his injuries disappeared instantly. This was too incredible. I wasn't lying, see? Seeing that the other party's injuries had healed, Zhongxian nodded his head. Without a doubt, the other party must have used the medicinal wine incorrectly. Why don't you ask them where they are injured, I'll help you analyze whether they should apply the medicinal wine externally or consume it. All right. After a moment of hesitation, Wu Zhen nodded. His credibility was at stake here. No matter what, he had to clarify the matter, or else he might just end up being labeled as a fraudster for his entire life. With the medicinal wine in hand, Wu Zhen immediately walked over to the sixth princess and clasped his fist. Sixth princess, you've blamed me wrongly. It's not that this medicinal wine was ineffective but that you've used it in the wrong manner. After receiving Zhong She's reassurance, Wu Zhen was filled with confidence. Used it wrong? The sixth princess had seen this fellow talking with Zhong She privately, and she frowned upon hearing those words. Indeed. You just have to show me where you're injured, and I'll immediately tell you whether you should apply it externally or consume it. I guarantee that you'll heal in an instant. Wu Zhen tilted his head up proudly, glad that he would be winning back his credibility. Where I am injured. And I have to show you at that. The sixth princess's face immediately turned scarlet in embarrassment. The heck, are you doing it on purpose? My injuries were caused by Zhong She, and after chatting with him, you came over here and asked me to give you a look at my injuries. In other words, you're saying that you want to look at my bottom? That's right. As long as I know the region and severity of your injury, I'll be able to confirm for you whether you should apply the medicinal wine externally or consume it. You must have used it the wrong way yesterday for it to be ineffective. Wu Zhen chuckled as he explained the matter to let the other party know that she had blamed him wrongly for the matter yesterday. However, halfway through his words, his sight suddenly turned dark. A slap was flying straight toward him. Pa! The slap caused a crisp echo in the main hall. Wu Zhen spun twice on the spot before regaining his balance. He was completely dumbfounded by the situation before him. You want to take a look? Why don't I send you to meet your maker? With a livid face, sixth princess sent a kick straight toward the fellow before her. Pang! Before Wu Zhen could process what was going on, he was already struck in the abdomen and was sent crashing onto the ground. Sixth princess, why did you hit me? What did I do? Wu Zhen cried. He had given the valuable medicinal wine, which he couldn't even bear to use, to the other party out of goodwill, thinking that he could win the other party's fancy with this. In the end, he only ended up being beaten up. After clarifying the reason and testing it out himself, he came over to redeem himself, only to be pummeled once more. Can anyone tell me what is going on? How in the world did my kind gesture end up like that? Wu Zhen crawled up to his feet, only to see the sixth princess rushing forward angrily to continue beating him up. Frightened, Wu Zhen hurriedly pleaded for help. Chichi, please help me talk to sixth princess. To dare to tease even sixth princess, you deserve it. Luo Chichi harumphed. She had heard the previous conversation as well. The fellow before her actually asked to look at the sixth princess's bottom. Even if he were to be executed on the spot, he would still be getting off lightly. Wu Zhen, how dare you tease sixth princess? You're courting death. At this moment, Xing Yuan also finally realized what Wu Zhen was up to, and he immediately rubbed his palms, preparing to give the latter the beating of his life. He was the most loyal fan of the sixth princess, and he had followed her everywhere. To dare to tease the sixth princess before my eyes, you must be thinking that I'm invisible. Wu Zhen burst into tears. I really intended nothing more than goodwill. This. Seeing that Wu Zhen was pummeled viciously, Zhong Xian scratched his head in bewilderment. As expected of the geniuses of the Master Teacher Academy, their thoughts truly couldn't be interpreted using common sense. Cough cough. Since everyone is here, let's head to the cleansing lake. Eventually, Emperor Yi Wentian couldn't watch on any longer, so he interjected in the fight among the few geniuses. Let's go. Knowing that it was no longer early, everyone hurriedly followed him to the cleansing lake. The cleansing lake wasn't in the royal palace nor within the boundaries of Huanyu capital. Instead, it was located in the intersection between Verdant Mountain and Dragon-Scaled River, a distance away from the capital. The location was heavily guarded by the personal guards of the royal family. The group rode on the aerial beasts prepared for them, and after half an hour of flight, a land filled with spiritual energy appeared before their sight. The verdant mountain resembled an immense dragon lying on the ground, whereas the dragon-scaled river was reminiscent of a river of stars embedded on the ground. Poets had once described this scenery as a dragon sipping from the winding river of stars. It was apparent that this land was a natural spirit-gathering formation with just a single look. Furthermore, under the suppression of the majestic aura of a dragon, the spiritual energy in the surroundings was gentle and nourishing to the soul. Incredible! With just a glance, Zhongshen's eyes immediately lit up. It was no wonder why this could become the foundation of a Tier 2 empire. The cleansing lake was indeed formidable. It was far superior to the spirit gather formation that he made. The spirit beast gradually descended to the ground. The cleansing lake is up ahead. Before entering, I'll give everyone a spirit cleansing incense as per the slots and duration agreed on previously, Yi Wentian instructed. As he said so, a guard walked over with 30 spirit cleansing incense in hand. The spirit cleansing incense was made of a material very different from ordinary incense. From afar, it looked like it was made of some kind of metal. It could float on water, and it would begin burning upon coming into contact with the cleansing lake. As the Hongfeng Empire had 3 lake eyes to themselves, they were given 9 spirit cleansing incense, and of which, Zhongshen took 3. Since one could only remain in a lake eye for 3 days, 3 incense sticks were sufficient for him. By the time the spirit cleansing incense was distributed, it was almost afternoon. Seeing that the cleansing lake was just about to be opened, Zhongshen followed behind Yi Qian to the lake eyes when someone suddenly called out to him from behind. "Zhongshe, I need to talk to you." Turning around, he saw Xing Yuan right behind him. It was Wu Zhen a moment ago, and now it was this fellow. What were they up to? But even so, seeing the anxious look on the other party's face, Zhongshen decided to listen to what he had to say. Thus, the duo moved to a corner beyond the sight of the others. After which, Xing Yuan jumped straight to the point. "I know that you've made a wager with 6th Princess." "Yes." Zhongshen didn't deny the matter. The first time they made a bet at the mystical treasure hall, this fellow was right there, and the other party personally saw his beloved 6th Princess turning into his maid. "I want you to lose, and make sure that 6th Princess doesn't notice it," Xing Yuan said. "Admit defeat." Zhongshen frowned. He was wondering what favor the other party was going to ask of him, but to think that it would be for him to admit defeat. "Indeed. As long as you admit defeat, I'll accede to any request you have," Xing Yuan harumphed. "Any request I have?" Zhongshen's eyes lit up. Xing Yuan nodded. "That's right. All right. I'm sure you know that 10,000 middle-tier spirit stones are at stake in my wager with 6th Princess. Since that's the wager, if you can give me 2 high-tier spirit stones to compensate my loss, I don't mind admitting my defeat," Zhongshen said calmly. The 6th Princess owed him 10,000 middle-tier spirit stones from the very start, and the bet at stake also involved another 10,000. As such, that added up to 20,000, which was equivalent to 2 high-tier spirit stones. He could easily control the speed at which he could absorb the spiritual energy in the cleansing lake. If he could earn 2 high-tier spirit stones from this matter, it would be a huge profit. While a high-tier spirit stone was theoretically worth 10,000 middle-tier spirit stones, there were very few who would be willing to trade a high-tier spirit stone. As such, even if Zhongshen were to obtain 20,000 middle-tier spirit stones, chances were that he wouldn't be able to get 2 high-tier spirit stones in exchange for it. 2 high-tier spirit stone? Xing Yuan's lips twitched. Even with his background, it wouldn't be easy for him to produce 2 high-tier spirit stones for a bet. "Since you're unwilling to accept my offer, forget it then. In any case, if 6th Princess loses, she will have to compensate me a total of 20,000 middle-tier spirit stones anyway," Zhongshen said. Even though 20,000 middle-tier spirit stones couldn't compare to 2 high-tier spirit stone, at the very least, he wouldn't be making a loss. "Fine, I'll agree to your request." Xing Yuan gritted his teeth. "As long as you do as you've promised, I'll give you 2 high-tier spirit stones when we return to the academy. However, as promised, you mustn't reveal this matter to anyone. Deal?" Zhongshen nodded. To earn 2 high-tier spirit stones with less than 3 days of effort, this deal was highly beneficial to Zhongshen. On top of that, he could also avoid offending Xing Yuan while placating the sixth princess. Just as the duo was done negotiating, a violent rumbling sounded, and dense spiritual energy suddenly gushed into the surroundings. It was as if a massive spirit-gathering formation had just come to life. "Look!" someone amidst the crowd suddenly exclaimed. Everyone turned their gazes over and saw a pillar of concentrated spiritual energy bursting into the heavens. A refreshing gust of wind infused densely with spiritual energy blew at the crowd. With just a slight inhalation, one could feel one's soul trembling with excitement, as though the road to achieving a breakthrough was within their reach. At the empty grounds in the distance, a massive lake slowly surfaced. Spiritual energy currents reminiscent of massive dragons roared furiously in it, as though they were going to soar into the heavens at any moment. 10 depressions of similar sizes could be seen around the lake. They were all of a radius of 2 meters, and they sat silently as though massive gemstones embedded on top of a tiara. The cleansing lake is open. Upon seeing this sight, everyone clenched their fists tightly. Chapter 640, Cheating. The main purpose of visiting Huanyu Empire was for the cleansing lake. After such a long wait, under everyone's expectant gazes, the cleansing lake finally opened. "Let's go over." Without wasting any time, Zhongxian and Xing Yuan hurried over to the crowd. Seeing the raging currents within the cleansing lake, everyone immediately realized that Yi Qian wasn't over-exaggerating at all. The massive waves within the lake did emanate concentrated spiritual energy, but the energy flowing within it was also frightening in itself. Anyone who dares to enter it recklessly would surely be crushed into bits. "Look!" Amidst everyone's astonished gaze, Yi Wentian flicked his wrist, took out a spirit intermediate tier weapon, and threw it into the lake. Catcher. In the blink of an eye, the weapon which even a transcendent mortal 8-dan expert would find difficult to destroy melted into a mass of liquid, which then sank to the bottom of the lake. This. Everyone's faces twitched in fear. Even though their physical resilience was far above ordinary humans, how could they possibly compare to a spirit intermediate tier weapon? If even such a tough weapon was reduced to a puddle in the lake instantaneously, they could already see themselves turning to dust should they enter it. It was no wonder Crown Prince Yi Qian said that even a transcendent mortal 8-dan expert wouldn't survive in the cleansing lake. Those words indeed rang true. Yi Wentian wrapped it up with a warning. "Given how violent the lake water is, I suggest everyone to cultivate calmly within the lake eye and not to venture beyond it. Otherwise, even a deity wouldn't be able to save you. Don't worry, we won't get reckless. We cultivate to grow stronger, not to die. Your Majesty need not worry about this matter. That's too scary. There's no way we'll take such a risk." Everyone hurriedly shook their heads. Given even a spirit intermediate tier weapon was reduced into a puddle in an instant, who would possibly dare to venture into that fearsome lake? "All right. Everyone, pick a lake eye. The 10 lake eyes possess equivalent effectiveness, so there's no need to worry. If it's preferable, those from the same vassal state can choose to remain together in order to look after one another." Yi Wentian waved his hands and said no more. Since the 10 lake eyes had the same effectiveness, there was no difference between picking one over the other. Zhongxian scanned the lake eyes for a moment before walking over to a cluster of lake eyes closest to the lake with Luo Xian and Bai Jianghai. The furthest lake eyes in the cleansing lake were shrouded with thick mist produced by the concentrated spiritual energy in the region. Even a transcendent mortal 8-dan expert would find it hard to see through the mist. Zhongxian had specifically picked this region so that no one would be able to see him as he cultivated, especially since he intended to keep the Heaven's Path cultivation techniques a secret. "Let's cultivate here." After finding the region where the spiritual energy and mist were the thickest, Zhongxian stopped and turned around to instruct Luo Xian and Bai Jianghai. "You two should cultivate at these 2 lake eyes. This way, if anything happens, we can help one another." "All right." The duo nodded, and just as they were about to enter with the spirit cleansing incense in their hands, they heard a shout. "The 2 of you, pick another lake eye." Turning around, Zhongxian saw Princess Feiya and Luo Chichi walking over. Seeing that a princess was actually vying for their spot, Luo Xian and Bai Jianghai were stumped. "The 2 of you should take the lake eyes over there." We hope to get a position closer to teacher, Luo Chichi said. That? Yes. Given that this was an order from Princess Faya and Luo Chichi, they dared not talk back. Thus, they quickly rushed over to the other lake eyes. In any case, since the lake eyes were all equal, it didn't matter where they were cultivating. Noticing Zhong Xian's gaze on her, Princess Faya harumphed. Humph, you need not think too highly of yourself. Since we have a wager on, I want to check if you are cheating. Think too highly of myself? I say you're thinking too much. Zhong Xian shook his head. I'm just trying to see which nerves of yours have turned psychotic. You. Princess Faya clenched her jaws angrily. You won't stay gleeful for long. Your sharp words won't help you in the cleansing lake. Flinging her sleeves, Princess Faya leaped into the lake eye without any hesitation. The spirit cleansing incense that she was holding immediately floated to the water surface and lit up. A wisp of smoke began drifting into the air. Hoo. Closing her eyes, Princess Faya began to cultivate. The spiritual energy in the lake eye seemed to flow faster and faster into her with each breath. At the same time, the smoke drifting from the spirit cleansing incense thickened as it started to burn down even more swiftly. Seeing how this lass dived straight into cultivating just to defeat him, Zhong Xian shook his head and jumped into a lake eye himself. Luo Chichi also jumped into a lake eye, picking one that would flank Zhong Xian between her and Princess Faya. While Zhong Laroche was her apothecary teacher, it hadn't been long since the both of them met, so they were naturally not close enough for her to be coming over to cultivate with him. The only reason why she came here was to prevent a fight between her good friend and her teacher. Princess Faya was obstinate, proud, and hated losing. If the two of them were to be left alone, who knew what would happen? As such, Luo Chichi decided to tag along so that she could intervene if a fight were to occur. Otherwise, the situation yesterday might just happen once more. While the sixth princess didn't reveal the culprit behind the two footprints on her bottom, it wasn't too difficult to deduce from her words that it had something to do with this apothecary teacher of hers. Usually, one would first strip their clothes before entering the cleaning lake. However, due to being in a public location, the two ladies decided against it. Even so, their drenched clothes that stuck to their skin still shaped out the beautiful curvature of their bodies. Zhong Xian glanced around for a moment before calming his mind. After which, he placed a spirit cleansing incense into the lake and began to cultivate. Closing his eyes, he immediately felt a surge of concentrated spiritual energy flowing through his entire body via his meridians and eventually nourishing his soul. A feeling of relaxation slowly spread across his entire body. This rate of absorption is too slow. After a moment later, Zhong Xian realized that even though the spiritual energy in the lake eye was highly beneficial to his soul, it had to go through his body first, and this significantly weakened the effectiveness of the spiritual energy, as well as lowering the rate of absorption. Furthermore, the body acted like a shackle whereas the soul was like a cotton inside the steel cage. Even the slightest growth had to take a painful amount of time. A thought surfaced in Zhong Xian's mind. Can't I just draw my soul out and absorb the spiritual energy directly? With his soul in his body, the body would become a natural barrier limiting the absorption of spiritual energy by it. However, what if he could draw his soul out and absorb the spiritual energy directly? Would his rate of cultivation improve? I should give it a try. With this in mind, he took a look around and confirmed that the two ladies around him were currently deep in their cultivation and that there was no one who could see what he was doing. After which, he activated the soul-guiding method and drew a soul that was perfectly identical to him in appearance from his glabella. As soon as his soul entered the lake eye, dense spiritual energy immediately gushed into his soul, leaving him revitalized. Indeed, this is much more efficient. Zhong Xian's eyes lit up. He hadn't even started cultivating yet, and the rate at which the spiritual energy was nourishing his soul was already faster than before. Closing his eyes, Zhong Xian immediately drove the Heaven's Path Soul Art and began pulling in the spiritual energy from the air frenziedly. Hong long long. The entire lake eye began to shake. Concentrated spiritual energy rushed toward his soul, causing the size of his soul to grow gradually. As his Heaven's Path Soul Art was only up to Transcendent Mortal 5 Dan, he was unable to advance on to 6 Dan. As such, the spiritual energy began to build on his soul instead, causing the size of his soul to grow bigger and bigger. To make an analogy, it was just like water and mercury. A difference in cultivation realm was qualitative, such as the difference between the two liquids. However, even among fellow water, a tub of water and a lake of water were a difference in quantity. While Zhongxian wasn't able to advance his soul cultivation to transcendent mortal 6 Dan yet, he could make his transcendent mortal 5 Dan soul grow stronger by piling up more soul energy. As Zhongxian started to absorb spiritual energy frenziedly, Princess Feiya suddenly felt an irregularity in the surrounding spiritual energy. She immediately turned her gaze to the side, and the scene she saw left her on the verge of fainting. 2 of the spirit-cleansing incense by Zhongxian's side had already burned out, and the third one seemed to be on the verge of burning out as well. Are you for real? How long has it been? 5 minutes? Or was it 10 minutes? The spirit-cleansing incense was meant to be depleted within 3 days, and yet you are going to finish within 5 minutes. Is there a black hole within you? Princess Feiya's body trembled, and the urge to spew blood welled up in her. She thought that as a transcendent mortal 6 Dan expert with a far stronger soul than the other party stood no chance at all. Who could have known that right after she started, when she had yet to burn off the tip of the first spirit-cleansing incense, the other party was already about to finish all 3 incenses? Did you need to be so exaggerated? How am I supposed to compete with that? Am I going to lose? What's going on? Luo Chichi was also alarmed by the agitation in the spiritual energy in the air. Upon seeing Zhongxian's spirit-cleansing incense, she nearly died from shock. His incense. He's already about to finish absorbing all of the spiritual energy in the lake eye. How am I supposed to compete against that? Princess Feiya was on the verge of tears. This. Luo Chichi scratched her head. Neither of them was a soul oracle, and they did not possess the eye of insight either. With his soul hidden beneath the water and shrouded by the spiritual energy in the surroundings, it was impossible for them to notice it. From afar, it looked as though he was cultivating normally. Hearing the discussion between the duo, Zhongxian stopped his cultivation, and his soul returned back to his physical body. Lifting his gaze to look at his spirit-cleansing incense, he nearly leaped in shock. Frowning, Zhongxian bellowed, "Who stole my spirit-cleansing incense?" He was certain he had 3 incense a moment ago. How could there only be 1 left in the blink of an eye? Someone must have stolen his incense. Stole? The 2 ladies were rendered speechless. You were the one who burned them out. Me? Zhongxian was taken aback. That can't be. If there is so little spiritual energy in here, how could it possibly be sufficient for 3 days? Zhongxian had barely started absorbing when the spiritual energy was already about to run out. Was this for real? He was still intending to make use of this cleansing lake to boost his cultivation significantly. Yet, his training session was already nearing its end, almost before he'd even started. Must the situation be so damned? So little? Hearing the other party's words, both Princess Feiya and Luo Chichi's eyebrows twitched violently. They had also tried cultivating as well, and while the lake eye might be small, it was extremely rich in spiritual energy. It felt as though no matter how hard they cultivated, it would never run out. Only a monster like you would think that it was lacking in spiritual energy. Teacher, it is probably due to you absorbing the spiritual energy a little too fast. How did you do it? Luo Chichi couldn't help but question him. When Zhong Larosha began to cultivate previously, the lake eye began bubbling and the spiritual energy in the surroundings grew agitated. These were signs of spiritual energy being rapidly absorbed. To think that not only would a transcendent mortal 4 Dan pinnacle cultivator be capable of absorbing spiritual energy to nourish his soul, he would also be able to cultivate so swiftly. How did he do it? Indeed. Are you cheating? Princess Feiya's eyebrows shot up. Even a grade 2 top student like Luo Chichi couldn't comprehend what had just happened. Could this fellow be cheating? Chapter 641, Frenzied Absorption Cheating? Zhongxian scratched his head. In a sense, what he did could really be considered as cheating. While the others were using their physical bodies as a bridge to nourish their soul, He was plunging his soul straight into the lake eye and absorbing the spiritual energy directly. This was just like how a retailer's profit margin would be cut should there be an intermediary between them and the manufacturer. But to be fair, he didn't make use of any artifact or weapon, it was all done through his own ability. Thus, it couldn't really be called cheating in the strictest sense. Indeed, cheating. If that's not the case, how could you absorb spiritual energy so quickly? Princess Feiya widened her eyes. This. Zhongxian had no idea how he should reply to that. The matter regarding soul oracles mustn't be made known or things could prove to become troublesome. After a moment of hesitation, Zhongxian replied, "If I had cheated, surely you should know how I did it. If even a princess from Hongyuan Empire couldn't find a way to cheat, how could I have possibly done so? If you don't believe me, why don't we swap lake eyes? Your lake eye is nearly empty already, who would want to switch with you?" Princess Feiya rolled her eyes. "Dream on. You have nearly finished absorbing your lake eye already. If I were to swap with you, what am I supposed to absorb?" "Teacher, I'll swap with you." On the other hand, Luo Chichi offered her own lake eye to Zhongxian. She was the strongest among the group who came from the Master Teacher Academy, having reached Cosmos Bridge Realm Pinnacle. Given her cultivation, the effects of the cleansing lake on her were already terribly limited. As such, she was willing to trade it for a chance to see how the other party managed to absorb the spiritual energy from the lake eye so quickly. This. After a moment of hesitation, Zhongxian nodded. His soul cultivation had only advanced by a small bit before his lake eye started to run low on spiritual energy. He couldn't possibly just wait idly for everyone to be done. Leaving his lake eye, Zhongxian stepped Luo Chichi's, and Luo Chichi stepped into his. "All right, you can start cultivating now. If you can cultivate as fast as before, I'll believe that you didn't cheat." Princess Feiya harumphed. This time, she stared at Zhongxian's lake eye without even blinking. She wanted to make sure the other party didn't put anything into the lake to cheat. "UN." Shaking his head, Zhongxian's body jolted slightly as his soul was drawn out from his physical body. Even a 6-star soul oracle was unable to see his soul, needless to say, they couldn't see it either. Hong long long. As he started to cultivate, the spirit-cleansing incense floating on the lake eye began burning down swiftly. In less than 5 minutes, the 3 incense sticks were on the verge of burning out once more. Zhongxian returned his soul back to his body helplessly. He had thought that things would improve if he changed to another lake eye, but he didn't expect the results to be the same. The lake dried out once more before his soul managed to get much spiritual energy in. The spiritual energy inside was simply too little. How was he supposed to cultivate like that? One should remember that for his soul to improve, he had sucked the entire seed water of the yin-yang lake dry back then. Frustrated, Zhongxian raised his head to look at the lady before him. "You saw everything just now, did I cheat?" This. Princess Feiya fidgeted awkwardly, and her face reddened. No. She had cast doubt on the other party's integrity, and yet the other party used his impressive capability to prove her wrong. "What do you expect me to say?" She felt so stifled inside that she could spew blood at any moment. If only she knew that this fellow absorbed spiritual energy so swiftly, she would have never competed with him. Wasn't this just looking for a face slap? It seemed like there was no point continuing this wager, she was already destined to lose. "All right, you should hurry up and cultivate." Seeing that the lady was on the verge of tears, Zhongxian felt awkward. He waved his hands and said, "There's no need to get anxious now, there's a chance that you might still win." He did promise Xing Yuan to allow the other party to win. He couldn't possibly allow the other party to give up as soon as the bet began. A chance. Luo Chichi rolled her eyes. "Who do you think you are fooling? You finished nearly 3 spirit-cleansing incense in 5 minutes, whereas both of our incense have barely burned through the tip. How could Feiya win like that? Surely you could put more sincerity into your consolation. Teacher is right, we should hurry up and cultivate. Let's not waste this opportunity." Even though Luo Chichi felt frenzied by Zhongxian's words, she still spoke up to advise her good friend. "UN." Princess Feiya nodded before closing her eyes to cultivate. While she knew that her odds of victory were nearly 0, cultivating here was highly beneficial to the soul, and this was an opportunity not to be wasted. Seeing that her good friend was still in the mood to cultivate, Luo Chichi heaved a sigh of relief. She shot Zhong Laosha a glance before shutting her eyes. While the spiritual energy in the lake eye was nearly depleted, given her rate of cultivation, it was still sufficient to last her half a day. Watching as the duo continued cultivating, Zhongxian rubbed his glabella. If he were to continue using his soul to absorb, this spirit-cleansing incense would surely burn out in less than 1 minute. It was a hard-to-come-by opportunity to enter the cleansing lake. Was he going to walk out of here without gaining anything? After all he had done, he felt like he had made a huge loss. But there was nothing else he could do at the moment. There was no point intentionally slowing his cultivation by absorbing it via his body. What should I do? Frustrated, Zhongxian was just considering if he should finish absorbing the spiritual energy in the lake eye and leave when a thought suddenly struck him, and his eyes lit up. Right. How did I forget about the Library of Heaven's Path? He had been too busy cultivating that he forgot about it. Placing his finger into the lake, he willed. Floors. Following which, his head jolted, and a book appeared before him. Master Teacher Continent, Huanyu Empire Cleansing Lakes Lake Eye. It possesses spiritual energy capable of nourishing one's soul and raising one's soul cultivation. Flaws. Number 1. There is too little spiritual energy inside as compared to the water in the lake. If one were to absorb it directly via one's soul, it'll dry up very swiftly. Number 2. Various flaws were listed in the book. Too little spiritual energy as compared to the water in the lake. That's right. The spiritual energy from the lake originates from the lake, so if I can absorb the spiritual energy straight from the lake, I won't need to worry about the spiritual energy drying up anymore. Upon seeing the first flaw, Zhongxian's eyes lit up as he turned his gaze to the lake beside him. The furious surges of energy intersecting one another within the cleansing lake induced fear in those that set their eyes on it, leaving them daring not to approach. In comparison, the lake eye was visibly much calmer. The spiritual energy here seemed much more inviting as compared to the raging ones on the other side. Similar to how a pit dug on a beach would be filled in soon by the waves of the sea, the lake eyes were formed by the spiritual energy from the lake permeating into these depressions. Naturally, the concentration of spiritual energy it contained was as good as a drop within an ocean. If Zhongxian wanted to absorb more spiritual energy, the massive cleansing lake was his best bet. Just that, given how the cleansing lake was able to even melt a spirit intermediate tier weapon in an instant, it's impossible for me to withstand it as well. While Zhongxian knew there was plenty of spiritual energy inside the lake, he didn't dare move recklessly, especially with the previous sight still fresh in his mind. That lake actually melted even a spirit intermediate tier weapon. Even though Zhongxian was confident in the resilience of his body, he knew he couldn't compare up to a weapon of that tier. After a long moment of contemplation, just as Zhongxian was about to give up, he suddenly slapped his forehead, and his eyes gleamed in excitement. Why am I so foolish? My physical body might not be able to enter the lake, but my soul can. If others were to separate their souls from their bodies, death would be inevitable. However, Zhongxian was an exception. Having inherited the several dozen millennia heritage of the soul oracles, he could easily separate his soul from his body and have it enter the cleansing lake independently. The searing energy contained within the cleansing lake which melted the spirit intermediate tier weapon previously would prove to be fatal to the souls of other soul oracles. They would be reduced to nothing in an instant. But having cultivated Heaven's Path soul art, the concept of the 5 soul declines didn't apply to Zhongxian. Thus, his soul would be completely unfazed by the searing energy. Furthermore, given the intangible nature of a soul, the violent energies rampaging in the cleansing lake that would have torn apart nearly anything easily wouldn't pose a threat to his soul. I should give it a try. Having thought things true, Zhongxian sat cross-legged to maintain a meditation position. Then, he drew his soul out of his body. His soul flew through the air all the way to the boundary between land and the lake. After a moment of hesitation, he finally stuck his hand in. His hand plunged into the water. I'm completely fine. After confirming that his soul didn't suffer the slightest damage or discomfort, Zhongxian's eyes gleamed in excitement. He immediately plunged his entire soul into the lake. Tzzzzzzzzzzzzzzzzzzzz. The raging currents of the cleansing lake that could melt even a spirit intermediate tier weapon was completely ineffective against him. Absorb. Moving to the center of the lake, Zhongxian sat cross-legged and began to drive the Heaven's Path soul art. Hong long long. Spiritual energy immediately gushed into his soul through various acupoints, raising his cultivation swiftly. Zhongxian moaned in pleasure. What concentrated spiritual energy! Indeed, when one door closes, another opens. He initially thought that the cleansing lake would be ineffective on him considering how swiftly the spirit-cleansing incense burned down, but to his delight, his soul was actually able to absorb spiritual energy straight from the cleansing lake. The quantity of spiritual energy in the lake I couldn't even start comparing to this. There was no need for Zhongxian to hold back at all. Right, I should have clone out to absorb some as well, Zhongxian thought. His clone also had to raise its soul cultivation. Since this was a valuable opportunity, it would be best to have him cultivate here as well. With a thought, Zhongxian's consciousness connected with the ring, and in the next instant, his clone appeared in the lake eye. To prevent anyone from realizing that there were two Zhongxians, he swiftly instructed his clone to sneak here. Fortunately, under the cover of the veil of spiritual energy, the two ladies didn't notice anything at all. Given that clone is crafted of 9 hearts lotus, it shouldn't fear the water of this lake. Considering that the material used to craft his clone was a god artifact, it was impossible that the water of the cleansing lake could possibly faze it. But to be safe, he had his clone put his hand in first, and as expected, nothing happened. Come over here. Zhongxian had his clone move over to where his soul was, and the two sat side by side one another. Let's start cultivating. The clone drew out his soul, and the two souls began to absorb the spiritual energy from the lake. Hong long long. Hualala. It was as though two gigantic vortices had appeared in the center of the cleansing lake. Spiritual energy flooded in at an insane rate. Jeji, jeji, jeji. As though consuming an immensely nutritious pill, the two souls grew non-stop. From a size equivalent to their physical body, they grew larger and taller. 2 meters, 3 meters, 4 meters. Back then, after consuming the spiritual energy from the seed water of the yin-yang lake, Zhongxian's soul grew to 3 meters large. However, this was even more exaggerated. Under the huge influx of spiritual energy, after 4 hours, the two souls had grown to a size of 5 to 6 meters. It could be said that they were no different from giants at this point. Chapter 642, Zhongxian is dead. But I'm still far from Lu Chong's size. Recalling Lu Chong's mountain-sized soul body, Zhongxian shook his head. 5 meters was already an astounding size for an ordinary soul oracle, but it was still far from matching up to Lu Chong. I should continue absorbing. Thus, Zhongxian continued to take in spiritual energy from the cleansing lake. As he picked up his pace, his clone did the same as well. Just like that, another 4 more hours passed. In this period of time, the spiritual energy in the cleansing lake visibly declined as the furious currents and rampaging energies dampened. The spiritual energy in the area has thinned, but I'm just a little way off to reaching 10 meters. The spiritual energy in the air had thinned to the point that it seemed as though it would dry up at any moment. However, seeing that he was nearing his goal, Zhongxian decided to quicken his pace. He was just a little off from reaching 10 meters. Once he broke this limit, his soul cultivation would reach newer heights. With this breakthrough, he wouldn't be too far off from matching the Lu Chong back then. While Lu Chong's soul was indeed huge, Zhongxian's soul had been tempered with the Heaven's Path soul art. While Heaven's Path soul art required extremely pure spiritual energy, it also made his soul far stronger than other soul oracles. Hong long. At that moment, his clone's soul suddenly jolted lightly. The other party had managed to surpass the 10 meters mark. To think that his clone would actually absorb spiritual energy at a rate faster than him, perplexed as to why one soul could absorb spiritual energy faster than the other despite being the same entity in essence, Zhongxian lowered his head to take a glance, and the sight he saw immediately rendered him speechless. His clone had his body to absorb spiritual energy from the lake as well. Forged out of a god artifact, the Nine Hearts Lotus, his clone's body wasn't fazed by the violent energies raging throughout the lake. Even though its rate of absorption was significantly slower than its soul, the additional boost from it allowed his clone's soul to cultivate much faster than the main soul. After reaching 10 meters, the soul of his clone grew visibly stronger. At the same time, its rate of absorption was also hiked up a notch. I should speed up as well. Feeling threatened by his clone, Zhongxian absorbed the spiritual energy from his surroundings with greater tenacity. But no matter how much effort he put into absorbing spiritual energy, he seemed to be gradually slowing down. Lifting his gaze, he realized that a giant vortex had formed around his clone, taking in the spiritual energy around him. It was no wonder his growth was slowing. A qualitative change would be induced in one's soul upon reaching 10 meters. The other party's rate of absorption was at least 3 times faster than him now. Seeing the other party frenziedly absorbing spiritual energy from the cleansing lake as though he wouldn't be content until the lake ran dry, Zhongxian suddenly felt a surge of rage. He slapped the other party's head and hollered, "What are you doing? Leave some for me. What the heck was this? Get this clear, you're my clone. Stop being so ungrateful. It's one thing for you to send me flying with a punch, now you're even snatching spiritual energy from me. Where did your sense of shame go? As an upright master teacher, how could I possibly have a shameless clone like you?" I slapped. The clone stopped his cultivation indignantly. Zhongxian had the other party return to his physical body, and then back into the storage ring. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief. He. With no competition, I should be able to break the 10 meters mark easily. Chuckling lightly, Zhongxian opened up all of the acupoints inside his soul. With his clone no longer vying with him for spiritual energy, he could finally hasten his rate of cultivation. Start. Muttering softly, he began to draw in spiritual energy furiously through his acupoints. Hong Long. The spiritual energy flowing into his soul was swiftly converted into soul energy. At this moment, a violent rumbling suddenly sounded, and the cleansing lake beneath him began to shake violently before eventually bursting apart. Hualala. The lake water flooded into the surroundings as though a leaking dam. What happened? Stopping his cultivation, Zhongxian immediately looked around him to see what was going on, only to see that all of the cultivators had opened their eyes, alarmed by this sudden turn of events. All of them had confused looks on their faces. This is bad. If other people notice my motionless body, it will be hard to explain the matter. His body was currently lying by itself in the lake eye. At this moment, there was still some spiritual energy mist shielding his body from the eyes of others. However, once the water from the lake ran dry and the mist scattered, he would be exposed before others. Given that everyone had already opened their eyes and that he was the only one cultivating, everyone would surely notice that something was amiss. Outside the cleansing lake, Emperor Yi Wentian and Pavilion Master Wei Jiang were looking over the entire lake from a distance not too far away. Lying in the east of the cleansing lake is the verdant mountain, whereas connecting from the west is the dragon-scaled river. With the breadth of the mountain and river, as well as the accumulation of energy from the earth vein, those that cultivate here will surely find their souls being enhanced, becoming even more resilient. Stroking his beard, Yi Wentian smiled. As the foundation of Huanyu Empire, the effects of the cleansing lake couldn't possibly be just to nourish one's soul. Absorbing the spiritual energy tempered by the earth vein could make one's soul more resilient, and this would be highly beneficial for future cultivation. This was especially beneficial for one's breakthrough to transcendent mortal 8 Dan, ethereal treading realm. The term ethereal treading originated from the idea of stepping on the intangible, treating the void as stairs. Using one's soul as an intermediary, one could borrow the strength from the surroundings to allow one's physical body to float in the air for a short period of time. Without a strong soul, not only would one be unable to float in midair, one might even find one's cultivation being capped. Perhaps even reaching transcendent mortal 7 Dan perfect harmonization realm would be a huge struggle. While the spiritual energy in the lake eyes was much tamer, it had also been tempered by the furious energies flowing through the river. Absorbing such spiritual energy was much more beneficial than absorbing the plain spiritual energy contained in spirit stones. This was precisely the reason why the cleansing lake was so famous. Indeed. Wei Shi nodded. A huge volcano lies under the cleansing lake, thus drawing in spiritual energy from the world. This spiritual energy would then be tempered by the volcano, thus raising its purity. On top of that, it also imbues a yang attribute to the spiritual energy, granting one the ability to ward off yin energy. Yuan. Yi Wentian chuckled. Look at the spiritual energy bubbling from the lake, it's as though a pot of boiling water. Only through endless tempering will a gem finally show its glow. Take this. What is going on? Just as Yi Wentian was commenting on how incredible the cleansing lake was, he suddenly froze, and his voice quivered in shock. Noticing the peculiarity in his companion, Wei Shi quickly turned his head, and what he saw stumped him. It was as though someone had poured a huge bucket of ice water into the bubbling lake water, thus returning it calmness. Swallowing a mouthful of saliva, Wei Shi suggested, perhaps, it might have been bubbling for too long, and it wants a rest. Having lived for more than 100 years, he had witnessed the opening of the cleansing lake many times. In fact, he had even once cultivated in it as well. Logically speaking, under the ceaseless clash between the various energies harnessed within the lake water, its bubbling should have never stopped. So why did it suddenly turn stagnant all of the sudden? Impossible. Yi Wentian's face paled. Our ancestors set up a formation around the lake water, and it is powered by the spiritual energy in the lake. If the lake were to turn stagnant, it could only mean that the spiritual energy has been sapped dry. If that's the case, the formation could break down any time now. Hong Long. Before he could finish, the ground suddenly shook, and a huge crack slowly spread across the cleansing lake. Following which, the lake water immediately gushed out frenziedly. It really broke down. Wei Shi felt the sight before him turning dark. The cleansing lake was the greatest treasure of Huanyu Empire. If it were to fall apart, the number of future experts the empire would surely sharply decrease, and the entire empire would fall into panic. How did this happen? Everything went as it should. There was no reason why cultivators cultivating in the lake would cause a sharp decrease in spiritual energy in the cleansing lake, thus resulting in instability in the formation. Watching as the water gushed out from the lake rapidly, Emperor Yi Wentian anxiously said, "I'll get 6th Princess and the others to evacuate now." Once all of the lake water runs dry, the pressure suppressing the volcano will be released, and this could result in a catastrophe. Wei Shi, you should hurry up and get Guild Leader Wu and the others from the Formation Master Guild over here to fix the formation. The cleansing lake had been regulated by a massive formation to create a balance among the energies from the Verdant Mountain, Dragon-Scaled River, and Earth Vein. However, with the formation breaking apart, the balance that had been suppressing the Earth Vein had been shattered, and as the Earth Vein grew more and more active, there was a good chance that an eruption may occur. Given the massive size of this volcano, no one incapable of flight would be able to escape should an eruption occur, not even a half-saint. Everyone here would surely be reduced to dust. The might of nature is unrivaled. Only a true saint could still stand their ground before it. Anything else would be nothing other than mere ants. It was one thing for him to meet with danger, but if some kind of mishap were to come unto the 6th Princess and the others, the entire Huanyu Empire could possibly be destroyed under the wrath of Hongyuan Empire. He thought that by inviting the 6th Princess here to train, he could make use of this chance to please the other party and raise Huanyu Empire's status. Who knew that the usually stable cleansing lake would suddenly explode? What the hell was this? Why did cleansing lake simply explode without any warning at all? If he were to know that Zhongshi was the culprit behind it, he would surely feel extremely stifled inside. All right, I'll go invite them over now. Understanding the severity of this matter, Wei Shi whistled sharply, and an aerial beast immediately flew over. Jumping onto its back, the duo headed straight for the capital. They had to repair the formation as soon as possible to keep the situation in check. Otherwise, with the Earth Vein becoming more and more active, it was just a matter of time before the volcano erupts. The land in a radius of several hundred kilometers would be flattened, and countless lives would be lost. UN. On the other hand, Emperor Yi Wentian immediately rushed toward where the sixth princess's lake eye was. At this moment, Princess Feiya had already awoken from her cultivation. Along with Luo Chichi, she was staring at a young man in bewilderment. Despite the huge commotion, and the entire cleansing lake being on the verge of exploding, this Zhongshe was actually still in the midst of his cultivation. How could he possibly keep his composure under such circumstances? If he really was cultivating, they would have admitted it. But the spirit-cleansing incense floating before them was still as long as before. In other words, in the previous 8 hours, this fellow didn't absorb the slightest spiritual energy. But if he wasn't cultivating, what else could he be doing? Zhong Larosha! Luo Chichi shouted, unable to hold herself back any longer. No response. Since something happened to the cleansing lake, and I'm unable to beat your record, we'll take this as your victory. Princess Feiya harumphed. The other party had already expended 5 spirit-cleansing incense, whereas she wasn't even done with her first one yet. Without a doubt, this bet was her loss. Since I've already admitted defeat, stop putting on an act and come out. But the young man before her remained completely motionless. There was no response whatsoever. What's wrong with him? No matter how foolish they could be, it was certain that something was amiss. I'll take a look. Anxious, Luo Chichi rushed forward and jumped into Zhongshen's lake eye. She nudged the other party, but the other party remained completely motionless. Stumped, she instinctively raised her forefinger to the other party's nostril, only to leap in shock. The young man wasn't breathing at all. With trembling lips, Luo Chichi uttered in horror, he's dead. Chapter 643, Zhongshen losing his first kiss. Shouldn't the spiritual energy in the lake eye be gentle and safe? How could someone die in here? A person couldn't actually cultivate to death here, could they? He's dead. How is that possible? Princess Feiya was also shocked. She had been thinking about how she could win a bet against this unreliable fellow, but never in her dreams did she expect the other party to simply drop dead like that. Let me take a look. She immediately leaped into the lake eye and touched the other party's body. In an instant, her face paled as well. The fellow who was still smug over burning down 5 spirit-cleansing incense 8 hours ago was now as hard as a rock, devoid of his breath and heartbeat. To think that he was actually dead. Even though she didn't bear the slightest goodwill toward this fellow, she was still the other party's maid. How could this fellow die before she could even redeem herself? Was this status going to remain with her for her entire life, unable to be dispelled? It can't be that he fell into this state because he absorbed too much too quickly while trying to win the bet against me. Princess Feiya's body trembled, and her face paled at this realization. The fellow had never left the lake eye, and this leaves only one single possibility. In an overly tenacious attempt to emerge victorious in this bet, he absorbed the spiritual energy from the cleansing lake too vigorously, resulting in a fault which eventually killed him. That's a possibility. Luo Chichi nodded grimly. But if that's the case, there's a high chance it might be a pseudo-death. As a talented apothecary, she knew a fair bit about various medicinal conditions as well. Pseudo-death. Princess Feiya was taken aback. Yes. If one were to absorb too much spiritual energy within a period of time, it might result in one's meridians being clogged up, thus obstructing one's blood flow. As a result, one might suffer from asphyxiation, resulting in a state of pseudo-death. However, this kind of death isn't true death. As long as one is treated promptly, one can be saved. I've once read of such a condition on a book. Given that Zhongshe was still perfectly fine a moment ago, this is very likely to be the situation, Luo Chichi said. Then, do you know how to save him? Princess Feiya asked worriedly. Frowning, Luo Chichi contemplated for a moment before replying, if I recall correctly, we need to remove the spiritual energy from his body in one swift stroke. In one swift stroke. Princess Feiya couldn't understand the intent behind these words. His meridians are currently bloated with spiritual energy, thus putting them under high strain. If we were to remove the spiritual energy from his body using traditional palm-to-palm method, it might cause a pressure difference in the spiritual energy in his body, and this could potentially result in his meridians rupturing. If this were to happen, it could complicate matters and make it even harder to save him. Even if we were to save him from such a condition by chance, he would be crippled for life. Thus, we have to remove the spiritual energy from his body in one swift stroke. At this point, Luo Chichi's face suddenly reddened. In other words, we need to remove spiritual energy from his body mouth to mouth. Mouth to mouth? Princess Feya's face twitched. Removing the spiritual energy from the other party's body palm to palm would indeed be inefficient, and a failure to maintain an apt pressure difference in the body could easily cause his meridians to rupture, given the feeble state it was in. Should his meridians rupture entirely, his life as a cultivator would be over. But they were of different gender. To remove spiritual energy mouth to mouth. With a face scarlet in embarrassment, Princess Feya urged, "Since he's your teacher, you should hurry up and save him." "Me?" Luo Chichi shook her head swiftly. The relationship between a teacher and student is sacred. This is a little too intimate. I cannot sully this relationship with this. Rather, aren't you intent on beating him in a bet? If he were to die, you'd have to carry the name of being his maid for your entire life. This. Princess Feya's face paled. The other party had struck right at her vitals. This was exactly what she felt the most conflicted about. Given that she had lost the bet, she would remain as the other party's maid. If this fellow were to die here, this shame would follow her for life. Others might even think that she had killed him out of rage from losing. She could never cleanse her reputation were that to happen. What the heck was this? Just a mere bet, and she suddenly became responsible for the other party's life. The thought of it left her incredibly stifled. Seeing that her good friend was still hesitating at this point, Luo Chichi urged her again. "You should hurry up if you want to save him. The longer you delay, the lower the possibility of him being resuscitated." Conflicted, Princess Feya contemplated for a short moment before gritting her teeth. "Fine, I'll save him." She had always been doted upon ever since she could remember, and never had she suffered such a huge humiliation. Not only did this fellow beat her in a bet, he even made her his maid and left her bottom swollen with a kick, leaving her nearly unable to walk. She was furious, but what she wanted to do was to beat him fair and square. If he were to die, how could she get even with him? This regret would follow her for life. Before this, the gender difference seemed less significant in comparison. Gritting her teeth tightly, she drove her zhunqi and slowly approached the other party's mouth. "What are you doing?" Zhong Xian, who had just rushed over from the cleansing lake, happened to arrive on the scene at this moment, and he nearly fainted from the sight. Due to the rapid growth of his soul, his control over it was lacking. Thus, to prevent anyone from noticing his soul, he had traveled underwater, and as such, he wasn't aware of what was happening above. Just as he was about to re-enter his physical body, he saw the sixth princess holding his body, ready to kiss him, and he nearly died of shock. The sixth princess looked normal on the surface, and yet as soon as he was gone, she actually tried to kiss him. Indeed, you can't judge a book by its cover. Stifled, he was just about to push the other party apart when an anxious voice sounded. "Sixth princess." At that crucial moment, Xing Yuan arrived on the scene. While he feigned calmness on the surface, his heart was crumbling within. He had spent so many years wooing the sixth princess, only to be ignored and snubbed. Yet, the other party was now taking the initiative to kiss a fellow who nearly angered her to death a few days ago. What was with this crazy twist? "Ah! Xing Yuan, you came at the perfect timing." Upon seeing that fellow, Princess Feya blushed in embarrassment. At the same time, she also heaved a sigh of relief. She quickly beckoned the other party over. "Hurry, come and save him." "Save him?" Xing Yuan was taken aback. "That's right. There isn't much time to explain the matter in detail, but to save him, it would require one to draw the spiritual energy in his body out in a single breath through mouth-to-mouth contact. Hurry up, or else he'll die." Princess Feya rushed the other party. Mouth-to-mouth contact. Xing Yuan's body swayed weakly. "Me and him?" On the other hand, Zhong Xian's sight also darkened. "While I might not show too much interest in ladies, this doesn't mean that I'm interested in guys. If I were to really be kissed by him, wouldn't I die of disgust? Indeed, hurry up. Otherwise, We won't make it in time. Princess Feiya nodded. Zhongxian was about to puke blood. On the other hand, Xing Yuan was also on the verge of a mental breakdown. Seeing the conflicted expression on the other party's face, Princess Feiya said, "If you won't, I'll do it." Xing Yuan clenched his jaws and replied, "Never mind, I'll do it." He would rather sacrifice himself than see his goddess's lips stolen by another man. Thus, he leaped into the lake eye, held Zhongxian's body in his grasp, and his lips began to approach the latter's. The heck? Zhongxian was on the verge of crying. No, I must return to my physical body now. Otherwise, I'll lose my first kiss to a man. At this moment, he couldn't care any longer. His soul immediately rushed straight toward his physical body. As long as his soul entered his physical body would regain its consciousness, and he would be able to salvage the situation before him. But Zhongxian's soul came into contact with his glabella, he suddenly stiffened. Due to his soul growing far too much in this round of cultivation, reaching a level beyond the tolerable limit for his physical body, he actually found himself unable to re-enter his body. To put it simply, his soul was too big for his physical body, causing him to be unable to squeeze back into his body. But that fellow's lips were on the verge of touching his already. I can't care anymore. Seeing that the two lips were about to meet, Zhongxian couldn't hold it back anymore. Gathering his soul energy, he sent a kick at the other party. While a soul may be intangible, it could materialize soul energy to fight with another. Peng. Not expecting that someone would attack him, Xing Yuan didn't even have the time to react before he was kicked in the face. With an anguished shout, he was sent flying into the cleansing lake. Save me! Xing Yuan screamed in desperation. He thought that, just like the spirit intermediate tier weapon, he would melt into goo upon falling into the water. But after shouting for a little longer, he realized that he was perfectly fine, and his face began to slowly flush. As the spiritual energy in the cleansing lake had been sapped dry, it had lost its violent nature and its corrosive ability as well. Let alone him, even an ordinary human would be fine in there now. It could be said that the cleansing lake was no different from an ordinary pool of water at this moment. What are you trying to do? Princess Feiya's face was as dark and cold as the middle of winter. She had thought that this fellow would be able to save Zhongsha swiftly, but who knew that before he would end up jumping here and there, screaming and shouting? What was he up to? Did he suffer a stroke? While an attack comprising soul energy might be intangible, they, as 5-star master teachers, should be able to notice that something was amiss if they were to pay closer attention. However, with everyone's attention on saving Zhongsha, no one noticed anything at all. If you don't wish to save him, just say so. There's no need to put on such an elaborate act. Not even waiting for the other party to explain himself, Princess Feiya stomped forward angrily. There was clearly nothing there at all, and yet this fellow leaped backward all of the sudden. It was clear that he didn't wish to save the other party. If he didn't want to do so, he should have said so earlier. This delay had robbed them of precious time. Xing Yuan nearly burst into tears. Can't you see this huge footprint on my face? However, Princess Feiya couldn't be bothered with him anymore. Puckering her lips, she began moving her face closer to Zhongxian's. 6th Princess, Xing Yuan Gongzi, Luo Chichi Xiajie, this is. Before her lips could come into contact, a shocked voice sounded. Lifting their gaze, they saw Emperor Yi Wentian standing before them. Yi Wentian was also completely stumped by the situation before him. He was going to evacuate the 6th princess and the others out of the lake eyes as soon as possible when he stumbled upon such a scene. While he was feeling extremely awkward, he couldn't help but sigh. Youngsters nowadays are getting more and more liberal. Even in the middle of a day, in a public pool, they would do such stuff. Upon seeing Yi Wentian, Princess Feiya heaved a sigh of relief and said, "You came at the perfect time. Something has gone wrong with Zhongsha's cultivation, so take a look quickly and see if you have any ideas on how he can be saved." The other party was a transcendent mortal 8-dan pinnacle expert, as well as the emperor of a country. In terms of eye of discernment and scope of knowledge, he was surely far above Luo Chichi. Perhaps, he might have a better idea than mouth-to-mouth something has gone wrong with Zhongsha's cultivation. Yi Wentian was taken aback for a moment before redness slowly crept across his face. He thought that the duo was giving in to their carnal needs, but it turned out that something bad had happened. Following which, his eyebrows slowly came together to form a tight frown. This young man was an existence that could potentially become a combat master in the future. More importantly, he was also a person protected by Pavilion Master Mo of Hongyuan Empire. If something were to happen to him, he could probably retire from his position as the emperor. Leaping into the lake eye, he walked up to Zhongxian, took a look, and frowned. Seeing the grim expression on the other party's face, Princess Feiya asked nervously, "What's wrong?" "It seems like..." Yi Wentian's eyes were widened, as though he could hardly believe what he was seeing. "His soul has left his body." Chapter 644. Crawling back in his soul has left his body. Princess Feiya, Luo Chichi, and the others were stunned. Such an issue was also known as missing soul, and it was one of the most feared things of a cultivator. If one's soul fails to return back to its body, the body would turn into an empty shell and die. However, for one's soul to leave its body, it must be sufficiently strong first. One must be at least consonant spirit realm pinnacle or even cosmos bridge realm to achieve that. How could such a situation occur on a clarifying turbidity realm cultivator? Yi Wentian spoke grimly. There are many causes for a soul leaving the body. For example, one's soul could be attracted by some kind of unique formation or fail to suppress one's inner demons. Zhongsha might have used a secret art beyond his means to cultivate his soul, resulting in such a situation. If we don't quickly return his soul to his body, he might really die soon. While soul oracles were the most adept at it, they weren't the only ones capable of drawing their souls out of their bodies. There were some formidable formations or secret arts that could achieve the same effect as well. Is there a cure for it? Luo Chichi asked anxiously. This young man was her apothecary teacher, and she couldn't watch as the other party died because of this. There's indeed a cure. However, it's extremely troublesome, and there isn't any time for it now. Turning to look at the cleansing lake, which was being drained at an astounding rate, Yi Wentian frowned. The steps to summoning one's soul were extremely complex and troublesome. Without several hours or even days of effort, it would be difficult for him to succeed. However, given that they were just moments away from the water in the cleansing lake running dry, and a volcano eruption was imminent, time simply wasn't on their side. Then what should we do? Pull him up first. Knowing that this wasn't the place to speak, Yi Wentian picked Zhongxian's body up and leaped to shore. Watching as his physical body was being carried away, Zhongxian's massive soul was on the verge of tears. "Are you all trying to save me or kill me?" After a moment of hesitation, Zhongxian decided against following his body. "While it would have been difficult for my soul to enter like that, with sufficient time, I could still have succeeded. However, you actually allowed Yi Wentian to take my body away. If my soul were to try to enter my body now, Yi Wentian might just try to dissipate my soul, thinking that I'm just a specter. I can only wait for a chance to snatch my body back." While a soul formed via Heaven's Path soul art didn't carry a heavy yin aura, thus making it hard for one to sense it, there was still a good chance that he would be noticed if he were to run right up to the other party's face. This was especially so given that Yi Wentian was a transcendent mortal 8-dan pinnacle expert. If he tried to creep up on the other party, he might just be killed before he could even identify himself. Besides, even if he were to report his identity to the latter, he had to win the latter's trust first. A clarifying turbidity realm cultivator possessing a 10-meter large soul that could leave its body and cultivate individually. How was he supposed to explain all of that? Thus, the best course of action he could do now was to remain hidden. As long as he could find a suitable opportunity to dive back into his physical body, everything would be solved. At the very most, he could just blame it on his anxiety to accomplish greater heights that resulted in his erring. While Zhongxian's soul was still camping in the water, waiting for a suitable moment to strike, Yi Wentian had already carried his body over to the courtyard where they were previously. Seeing that the other party was completely motionless, Hongshe, Luoshe, and the others immediately rushed up anxiously and asked, "How is Zhongshe?" "Most probably, his soul has left his body." Yi Wentian said with a grim voice. His soul has left his body. Hongsha's face paled as his body shook in agitation. How could that be? Zhongsha's teacher was an incredibly powerful existence that could possibly be an 8-star master teacher. To actually cause his student to lose his soul. If he were to learn of it, not only Huanyu Empire, perhaps even the entire Hongyuan Empire would be a goner. If I'm not mistaken, it could be due to the sudden agitation of the cleansing lake in the midst of his cultivation that caused his soul to be jolted away, thus leaving behind this empty shell, Yi Wentian said. This was the only explanation he could think of. Otherwise, how could others be fine while he was in such a state? It must be due to the abrupt change in the lake that jolted his soul out of his body. If his soul was still intact after the impact, it would still be possible to find him. However, if his soul were to have dissipated, it would be extremely difficult to save him. With a pale face, Hongsha was just about to ask if Zhongsha could be healed when the ground suddenly shook. A searing aura suddenly burst forth from the center of the lake. This is bad, the volcano is about to erupt. Yi Wentian's face immediately warped in shock. He quickly placed Zhongxian's corpse down on a stone table and turned his sight over. The situation at the cleansing lake also caught the attention of others. At this moment, the lake water was bubbling violently. Searing heat waves flowed into the surroundings, and the ground shook non-stop. It was as if a massive savage beast was rampaging beneath the ground, threatening to leap out at any moment to slaughter them all. What's going on? Feeling the shaking intensify, everyone frowned. I think it's about to reach its limit. Clenching his fists tightly, Yi Wentian's face was turning paler by the moment. He thought that even though the formation was breached, given how many years that the cleansing lake had been maintained for, it should be able to suppress the volcano for another few more hours. Who knew that everything would unfold so quickly? If everything were to go down at this rate, in less than 10 minutes, the rampaging energy contained in the volcano and the earth vein would come gushing out. Yi Qian, quickly take 6th princess and the others away. Yi Wentian turned around and quickly instructed. As the emperor, he couldn't leave the scene. However, nothing bad must happen onto the 6th princess and the others. All right. Yi Qian also understood the severity of the incident, and he rushed forward to Princess Feiya. 6th princess and senior Xingyuan, the cleansing lake isn't going to hold on for much longer, and an eruption is imminent. This area is dangerous, so allow me to bring you to a safer location. All right. Xingyuan nodded, and he quickly turned around to beckon Princess Feiya to leave as well. However, the latter simply looked at Yi Qian with a frown and said, since this fellow's soul isn't in his body, does that mean that his soul is currently in the cleansing lake? Yi Qian was taken aback. That should be the case. Then what should we do? If we don't find his soul and deliver it back to his body, he really will die. Princess Feiya said anxiously. Don't worry, I'll have my men look for it. Senior, you should hurry up and make use of the little time we have left to leave. Yi Qian reassured. Yuan. Nodding her head, Princess Feiya turned to her good friend and said, let's go first. The reason why she wanted to save Zhongxian was because she couldn't bear the shame of being the other party's maid for her entire life. Since the other party's soul had escaped from his body, there was nothing else she could do. Even if she were to remain here, she would be completely useless. Thus, she decided to simply leave. Luo Chichi shook her head. You go first. I'm indebted to Zhong Larosha, and given that his life and death is uncertain at the moment, I really cannot leave at this moment. Zhongsha had once taught her pill forging, thus inducing huge growth in her pill forging skills, and above all, she had already acknowledged the other party as her teacher. How could she leave on her own now that the other party was in a coma? She couldn't bring herself to do so. Since you aren't leaving, I'll stay here too. I'm also interested to see what is happening to the cleansing lake. Seeing her good friend refusing to leave, Princess Feiya decided to remain here as well. Hearing that the duo had decided to remain here, Yi Qian nearly went insane on the spot. Just as he was racking his brains to find a way to persuade the two obstinate ladies, a gust of wind suddenly howled above them, and a massive aerial spirit beast appeared before the crowd. Hoo hoo hoo. A few figures leaped down from the sky. Taking a closer look at the men falling from the sky, Yi Qian's eyes lit up. It's Wei Yishuo and guild leader Wu from the Formation Master Guild. He knew about the secret of the cleansing lake as well, and this situation was clearly due to the energies in the lake being imbalanced, resulting in the collapse of the formation. As a 5-star pinnacle formation master, guild leader Wu might be able to find a way to reverse the situation. How did this happen? Reaching the ground, guild leader Wu looked around him and saw the lake water flowing into the surroundings, and the ground trembling violently, as though it would collapse under them at any moment. He frowned. The Huanyu Empire royal family would invite him over each year to reinforce the formation, so he knew a great deal about the formation as well. If it was just cultivating in the lake eye, it should be impossible for such a situation to occur. Then why was everything crumbling now? I don't know the exact reason, but now isn't the time to be talking about this. Guild leader Wu, hurry up and see if there's a way to salvage the formation so as to stop the volcano below from erupting, Yi Wentian instructed anxiously. Nothing would change even if they were to point fingers now. The urgent matter at hand was to see if there was a way to salvage the situation. Otherwise, none of them here would survive this ordeal. Yuan. Knowing the severity of the matter, guild leader Wu nodded. He turned his sight over to the lake. Elder Lu, you will take the Khan position. Elder Han, you will take the Gen position. After assessing the situation, he quickly issued orders to the other elders who came with him. The few elders nodded and quickly got into their respective positions. Then, they each took out a formation flag and stabbed it deeply into the ground. Hong Long. As soon as all of the formation flags got in place, the spilling lake water was suddenly held in place, as though it was being sealed by something. However, it was as if sealing a rampaging dragon. The ground tremored more and more violently, like it would tear past whatever that was restraining it to burst forth. This isn't right. Guild leader Wu frowned. Emperor Yi Wentian walked up to the group and asked, "What's wrong?" Located precisely at the intersection of the Verdant Mountain, Dragon-Scaled River, and the Earth Vein, the cleansing lake should be rich in spiritual energy. The formation set up here tapped into the concentrated pool of spiritual energy here to suppress the violent energies from the 3 sides at this intersection. How come there's no spiritual energy here now? Guild leader Wu was astonished. No spiritual energy here? Yi Wentian froze. He closed his eyes and tried perceiving the surroundings carefully, and he realized that something was indeed amiss. Just a few hours ago, the spiritual energy here was so powerful that even a transcendent mortal 8-dan expert would be slaughtered easily if he were to enter the lake. How could it disappear so abruptly? Indeed. Guild leader Wu nodded. He was just about to speak when someone behind him shrieked. Hearing the voice, Yi Wentian quickly turned around to see what was going on. He immediately saw Luo Chichi and the 6th princess staring doubtfully at the master teacher known as Luo Xian. Where's Zhong Laroche? On the stone table right before them, Zhongsha's corpse had disappeared without a trace. Etchi. Hearing the other party's questions, Luo Xian's mouth quivered uncontrollably. His eyes were widened, and he looked as though he was about to cry at any moment. He pointed at the lake not too far away and said, "He was still lying there a moment back, and in the moment that my attention was somewhere else, he crawled back into the lake." Chapter 645, Physical body too weak, he crawled back in himself. Everyone stared at one another in bewilderment, as though someone had struck the back of their heads with a wooden bat. Do you take me for a fool? His soul has left his body, and is no different from a corpse now. How could he possibly crawl back into the cleansing lake himself? Princess Feiya glared at Luo Xian angrily. Even if you wish to scare us, you should find a more believable story. I took a look at Zhongsha myself, and his heartbeat and breathing had halted, and his body was stiff and cold. He was no different from a corpse. Under such circumstances, how could his body possibly crawl back into the lake by itself? Yi Wentian, Hong Shuo, and the others shared the same thoughts as well. They turned to look at Luo Xian, wanting to hear his explanation. I'm not lying. Seeing how everyone was staring at him as though he was a lunatic, Luo Xian found himself on the verge of really going insane. The commotion caused by the cleansing lake previously was too large, and everyone's attention was captured by it. He was no exception as well. However, at that moment, he saw a black shadow in his peripheral vision. It was from the corpse-like Zhong Xian. Somehow, the fellow seemed to have found a surge of strength within him. Through pushing his hands against the ground, that fellow swiftly crawled toward the lake. Everything happened so quickly that Luo Xian barely saw a grey blur. Seeing the incredibly stifled expression on the other party's face, Luo Chichi asked, "Calm down, how did he crawl into the cleansing lake? Did he wake up, or was he still in his previous state?" His eyes were still closed, and his body was still stiff and lifeless. It didn't seem like he had woken up at all. Even though it was just a momentary glance, as a half 5-star master teacher, Luo Xian was still able to notice some details regarding the incident. While that fellow did move, his movements looked like a puppet on a string that was being drawn forward instead. But of course, that was also the limit of his eye of discernment. His body was stiff, and his eyes were closed, and he crawled to the cleansing lake by himself. Princess Feiya frowned. "You mean that he has been possessed?" Cough cough. Yi Wentian choked on his own saliva. Zhongsha's soul has only escaped his body, he isn't truly dead yet, so it is impossible for him to be possessed. Then, what was with him crawling away by himself? Hongsha asked. Among those present at that moment, only he and Luo Xian knew that Zhong Xian was the direct disciple of an 8-star master teacher. Even though Bai Jianghai had participated in the Hongfeng Empire Master Teacher Tournament as well, he wasn't present for the affairs that night, so he wasn't too sure about the details. If Yang Shi were to learn that on top of having his soul missing, his disciple had his body possessed as well. Hongsha trembled. "I'm not too sure either." Yi Wentian shook his head. He had never stumbled before such a bizarre incident in his life before. Hong Long. Just as everyone was completely perplexed by how a fellow who had his soul missing could possibly crawl away, the ground suddenly shook violent once more. Everyone immediately staggered, nearly falling to the ground. We're in a dire state now. The strength of the earth vein is growing by the moment, and the formation is on the brink of collapse. Everyone, we need you to infuse your zhenqi into the lake to maintain its stability, Guild leader Wu yelled anxiously. Hearing the shout, no one could spare a single thought for Zhong Xian anymore. They quickly turned their attention to the formation before them. The lake water which had been sealed by the formation flag bubbled once more. As though it was set on fire, it threatened to knock down the barrier. In order to stabilize the barrier, Elder Lu, Elder Han, and the others had infused all of their zhenqi in, and their faces paled in frailty. They seemed as though they would collapse at any moment. "All right, quickly infuse your zhenqi into the lake." Hearing his words, Yi Wentian understood that they were at an extremely crucial and dangerous moment. Thus, without any hesitation, he stepped forward and pumped his zhenqi into the lake. Hong Long. With the infusion of fresh zhenqi into the lake, the shaking formation flags stabilized slightly. Following which, Wei Yishu, Hong Shi, Luo Chichi, Princess Feiya, and the others who were cultivating at the lake I stepped forward and did the same as well. Under the massive influx of zhenqi, the shaking formation flag began to show signs of stabilization. The rampaging lake water below also gradually regained its calmness. Even so, the furious rumbling of the volcano could still be heard below. It was as if even though the massive beast had been suppressed for the time being, it would still break free with sufficient time. Guild leader Wu, such a forceful measure isn't feasible in the long run, Wei Yishu commented. For the time being, they were still able to maintain the formation and suppress the earth vein and the volcano with brute force, but once everyone's zhenqi ran dry, the situation could possibly rebound on them. Besides, as time passed, the earth vein would gather more and more strength. In a way, it was similar to a spring. The further one tried to suppress it, the greater it would rebound back at one. By then, they would be placed in an even more dangerous situation. Indeed. You all continue suppressing the formation first. I'll study the formation and see how I can re-establish the balance between the earth vein, verdant mountain, and dragon-scaled river to control the volcano below, Guild leader Wu said. The might of a formation was dependent on many factors, such as the geographical terrain or even the position of celestial bodies. While the formation had been reactivated through the use of the formation flag, the intense trembling from a moment ago had changed the geographical terrain. Thus, some adjustments had to be made to the formation to bring out its greatest might. If he could get the formation working properly once more, it would be able to draw in spiritual energy once more and possibly resolve the crisis they were in. All right. Understanding the intent of guild leader Wu, Yi Wentian, Wei Shi, and the others nodded their heads silently. Spreading their palms wide, they continued to infuse their zhengqi into the lake frenziedly so as to suppress any movement from the volcano. On the other hand, with a compass in hand, guild leader Wu slowly walked around the formation in order to find the layout to best bring out the might of the formation. While a tense atmosphere weighed on the shore, within the lake, Zhongxian's soul heaved a sigh of relief. It was fortunate that an abrupt movement in the lake had caught everyone's attention. Otherwise, it would never have been so easy for him to take back his body. As his soul was simply too big, he wasn't able to slip in instantly. Thus, he could only forcefully control parts of his body to have it walk over by itself. His original thought was to move his legs, but due to the extreme stiffness in the region and the immense complexity of making his body walk, he had to give up on the idea. Thus, he had no choice but to move his arms and have his body crawl into the lake. However, Luo Xian coincidentally caught sight of him, thus resulting in the possession issue. Regardless, I should first have my soul enter my body first. Zhongxian could easily imagine the uproar that was happening outside, but he didn't have the luxury to be thinking about it now. His soul immediately rushed straight to his glabella in an attempt to enter his body. No matter how difficult it may be, he had to do so. Otherwise, his body might just really die on him. Tzzzzzzzz. His massive soul trying to squeeze into his physical body was similar to an elephant trying to squeeze into a human-sized door. I can't get in. Zhongxian gave it all his might, but it was simply an impossible feat. He couldn't help but shake his head. A 10-meter-tall soul forcefully entering a body of 1.8 meters. If not for his soul being intangible, his bones would probably have shattered into countless fragments by now. His soul was squeezed to the extent that it was distorted scarily, but he still couldn't even get half of it in. Right, how did Clone manage to get into his body so easily then? Zhongxian suddenly froze. His clone's soul was much larger than him, but the other party didn't have any problems entering his body at all. Why was he having so much trouble then? Who? Doubtful, Zhongxian brought out his clone and communicated with him. Soon, he found himself being rendered speechless. His clone's body was forged using the 9 Hearts Lotus, granting it extraordinary flexibility. Putting aside a 10-meter-tall soul, even a 100-meter-tall soul would be able to slip in easily without any trouble. On the other hand, his main body was still mortal. Staring at the clone, Zhongxian couldn't help but feel frustrated at how his main body ended up being inferior to his clone's. But this couldn't be helped. Anything forged from a god artifact was bound to be extraordinary at birth. It seems like I have to focus my attention on cultivating my physical body when I finally get back into my body. Otherwise, it won't be able to withstand the further cultivation of my soul. Zhongxian rubbed his glabella. After communicating with his clone, Zhongxian finally understood that the main reason why he couldn't get into his body was because his body was still too weak. If his body possessed abilities equivalent to the 9 Hearts Lotus, he would never have ended up facing such a difficult time now. He had cultivated his physical body twice, but those were both when he hadn't reached transcendent mortal realm yet. While his physical body was superior to ordinary cultivators, it was still insufficient to house such a large soul. What the hell is this? Zhongxian was speechless. To absorb too much spiritual energy and be unable to re-enter his body, he was probably the only one in the entire history of the Master-Teacher continent to meet with such a ridiculous situation. The only way I can resolve this problem is to find some way to cultivate my physical body. Only a strong body could harness such a huge soul. However, given that his body had no soul, how could he possibly cultivate? This paradoxical relationship sure made one's head hurt. Boom. Just as Zhongxian was troubled over the matter, the lake water around him suddenly shook intensely. Lowering his head, he saw a searing heat wave suddenly rising from the bottom of the cleansing lake. This is geothermal heat. Could there be a volcano underneath? Zhong Xian frowned. With his soul energy protecting his physical body, he was in no danger at all. However, to be able to cause the entire lake to boil in the blink of an eye, there must be a massive volcano beneath the lake. Only the earth flame could possess such searing heat. Back then, when retrieving the crimson flame lotus seed, Zhong Xian happened to see it, and he understood how fearsome it could be. At that moment, a thought struck Zhong Xian, and his eyes lit up. Right. If I can draw the earth flame over and create an amalgamation of yin and yang through fusing it with the lake water, perhaps I might be able to temper my physical body without controlling it. In his long journey, he had collected innumerable books, and a huge portion of them were regarding tempering one's physical body. Some involve the usage of poison, some involve pushing oneself to the limit, and some require earth flame and a spiritual energy lake. Earth flame was a flame created naturally formed by the movements of the earth veins, and it harnessed the weight of the earth. On the other hand, spiritual energy lake was formed in a region where spirit veins intersected, and it carried the majesty of nature. If these two were to be fused together, they would create the perfect mix for tempering one's physical body. However, my clone and I have nearly sapped the spiritual energy in the lake dry. With an idea in mind, Zhong Xian felt a little more relaxed. However, a new problem soon emerged. It took innumerable years for so much spiritual energy to gather in the cleansing lake, but in just 8 mere hours, he and his clone had nearly sapped it dry. Without spiritual energy, the entire lake would only be engulfed by the earth flame. If he didn't resolve this problem before drawing the earth flame up, instead of tempering his physical body, he would only be barbecuing himself. Give a few minutes and add a pinch of salt and cumin, and he would be ready to be tucked into. Chapter 646, A Shoe Forget It, This is a dire situation. I'll use that. Flicking his wrist, Zhong Xian took out the spirit stone that he obtained as the prize for the Master Teacher tournament. The spiritual energy harnessed within a high-tier spirit stone was immense. Since there was no better choice, Zhong Xian could only make use of it to temper his physical body first. Hong long long. While he was still hesitating over the issue, the ground trembled once more. Then, he heard some muffled voices above the water surface. Following which, many surges of zhenqi began gushing into the lake, and the dying spiritual lake came to life once more. This. Zhong Xian's eyes lit up. He was just troubled about how he should return spiritual energy back into the lake when someone suddenly sent zhenqi over. It was as if a pillow was delivered when one was about to nap, or a feast was spread out just as one was hungry. Furthermore, this is zhenqi, refined spiritual energy. It'll be easier for me to absorb it. If Zhong Xian were to use spirit stones, given that the spiritual energy contained inside wasn't refined yet, it would be inconvenient for him to absorb it. However, zhenqi was different. Zhenqi was similar to a concentrated extract of spiritual energy, thus making it much easier to absorb. Could someone above know that I'm in dire need of tempering my physical body and intentionally delivered zhenqi over? Zhong Xian scratched his head in confusion. He had been too busy trying to return his soul back into his body to care about what was happening above. Could the others have realized that he needed spiritual energy, and decided to expend their own zhenqi to help him? They were all too kind. Touched, Zhong Xian turned to his clone. You should draw the earth flame up. I'll find the most suitable place to temper my physical body. All right. His clone nodded before rushing to the center of the lake, where the source of the heat was coming from. As a god artifact, the Nine Hearts Lotus was fazed by neither heat nor cold. While the earth flame might be a formidable force, it wasn't sufficient to damage it. After the clone left, Zhong Xian carried his physical body to look for the location most suited to temper his physical body. Soon, Zhong Xian came to a stop. He maneuvered his body such that it was sitting cross-legged on the ground. After a lot of trouble, he managed to open the pores throughout his body, and only then did the zhenqi floating in the river begin to gush into his body. The single origin conceives two, two conceives three, and three conceives all. Heaven's Path zhenqi was refined from the most fundamental and most accurate cultivation technique. It possessed no attribute, and it could fuse together with zhenqi of any attribute. Thus, even though there were many different types of zhenqi around him, it made no difference to him at all. Just by drawing it into his body and driving it toward his dantian, it would be automatically refined to remove all impurities and form the purest heaven's path zhenqi. And under the tempering of these aura, Zhongxian's body was gradually getting stronger and stronger. With a compass in hand, guild leader Wu walked a few rounds around the entire lake silently. Seeing the sight, Wei Yisha couldn't help but ask, "Guild leader Wu, have you found a solution yet?" "Calm down, this is a grade 6 formation. With my capability, I can only reinforce it. It would be extremely difficult to modify it." Guild leader Wu frowned deeply. He was only a 5-star pinnacle formation master, and even if he were to give it his all, he still wouldn't be able to set up a grade 6 formation. The most he could do at the moment was just to sustain the formation. Even though he did say he intended to modify the formation based on the change in geographical terrain, it would be rather unlikely for him to succeed. "Then what should we do? We can't possibly go on infusing our zhenqi in like this," Wei Yisha exclaimed. Infusing zhenqi into the cleansing lake could postpone the danger, but it wouldn't resolve the problem they had at hand. "Give me some time." Guild leader Wu waved his hands. "Even though it's out of desperation that we're infusing zhenqi in, the consumption in maintaining the barrier through such isn't too high. With so many people, we should be able to last for 2 hours. As a lake that was concentrated in spiritual energy previously, it carried the ability to store spiritual energy and zhenqi. While this method might be troublesome, it should still buy them a decent length of time. Within this time period, perhaps he could find a solution to repair the formation." "All right then." Knowing that there was no better solution, Wei Yisha nodded. Just as he was about to speak, Yi Wentian's face suddenly warped in shock. "Wei Yisha and guild leader Wu, look." Turning their gazes over, they saw the center of the lake shaking violently, and a huge vortex gradually appeared. TZZZZZ. The vortex gradually grew larger. The zhenqi which the crowd had just pumped into the water seemed to have been swallowed whole, disappearing entirely. "It seems like it's consuming our zhenqi." "That seems to be the case. My zhenqi has disappeared. It's our zhenqi that is preventing the formation from collapsing. Once it is consumed dry." Everyone stared at one another with widened eyes. What was going on? Wasn't this lake a place that could be used to store zhenqi? If that was the case, how was all of their zhenqi consumed in the blink of an eye? Swallowing a mouthful of saliva, Wei Yisha turned around and exclaimed, "Guild leader Wu, the lake is consuming our zhenqi. I fear that we won't be able to last 2 hours. Then, how long can you all hold on for?" Guild leader Wu frowned. Wei Yisha did a rough calculation based on everyone's cultivation and said, "At most, 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Guild leader Wu's face warped in shock, and he clenched his jaw. 10 minutes is fine too. As long as the earth flame doesn't surge up, we will be safe. I'll try to find a solution within this period of time. Or else." As he spoke, he stared at his compass intently to study the formation. However, at the moment, the ground shook once more. What happened this time? Turning his gaze back to the cleansing lake, he saw Wei Yisha and Yi Wentian looking at him with tearful faces. It seems that the earth flame has surged up. Guild leader Wu felt as though he was about to faint. What the heck was this? When he thought that the cleansing lake could store spiritual energy, and by infusing zhenqi into it, the formation could last for a significant period of time, all of the zhenqi ended up being consumed instead. Just as he said that they would be safe as long as the earth flame doesn't surge up from the volcano, it immediately happened. Dear heavens, are you toying with us? Hong long long. As the earth flame threatened to leap out from the lake, the cleansing lake raged once more, and unable to take the impact, an elder was sent flying as mouthfuls of fresh blood spurted from his mouth. Catcher, the formation flag before him also broke into 2 halves. We're done for. With a pale face, guild leader Wu couldn't help but stagger backward feebly. The formation was already on the verge of breakdown when there was no spiritual energy in the cleansing lake to maintain it. Now that even the earth flame was gushing up to the earth, the eruption of the volcano was inevitable now. We should hurry up and leave. Guild leader Wu waved his hands in desolation. With the eruption of this volcano, the entire Huanyu capital would be plunged into a massive catastrophe. Countless lives would die due to this disaster. Is there really no solution at all? Yi Wentian clenched his jaws tightly. None at all, unless... Upon recalling something, Guild leader Wu shook his head and said, "No, it's impossible to pull off." Unless what? Yi Wentian and Wei Shi turned their sights over to Guild leader Wu. There's no point. It's something that can't possibly be achieved. Guild leader Wu sighed. Why don't you tell us? Maybe we can find a solution together, Yi Wentian said anxiously. With the earth flame gushing up, the group probably didn't even have 3 minutes left. If Guild leader Wu had a solution in mind, they could at least give it a try. After all, they couldn't possibly watch idly as millions of lives were extinguished before them. The main purpose of the formation is to maintain balance among the energies from the verdant mountain, dragon-scaled river, and the earth vein, thus suppressing the volcano underneath. This was the reason why Huanyu capital was able to enjoy so many years of peace. However, in the end, a formation can only be considered as an external regulator. If we could find the exact point where the energies of the trio intersect and direct them to cancel one another out, we would be able to return stability to the region even without the formation. But, we don't have the luxury of time to do so at this point. Besides, this matter involves the energies from the entire verdant mountain, dragon-scaled river, and earth vein. If we were to make a mistake here, we might just make things much worse. Guild leader Wu said. Wei Shi and Yi Wentian fell into deep contemplation. The both of them understood the meaning behind Guild leader Wu's words. In truth, the main purpose of the formation was to regulate the energies from the three sides to create a balance. If they could find the balancing point where the three energies intersected and direct their flow such that they cancelled one another out, they could create an equivalent effect as well. But, how were they supposed to find this point? Putting aside how the verdant mountain and dragon-scaled river stretched for thousands of kilometers, just the fact that the earth vein was located underground already made it impossible for one to determine the intensity of its energy at specific locations. If they were to make an error and have the energies superimpose on one another instead of cancelling one another out, they could possibly worsen the disaster. This was similar to balancing a gold coin. The slightest deviation would lead to the coin falling. It was no easy feat to balance the three energies. Not to mention, they had no time now. The earth flame was surging up, the zhunqi everyone pumped into the cleansing lake had been devoured, and one of the formation flags was destroyed. In less than 3 minutes, this entire area would be turned into ruins. Nothing would be left behind at all. Let's evacuate everyone now. Guild leader Wu waved his hands. Yes. Knowing that there was nothing they could do, Yi Wentian hurriedly issued instructions to everyone. Hualala. The beast tamers on duty were immediately beckoned, and 8 aerial spirit beasts came flying over. Knowing how dangerous the situation was, Yi Wentian had already made preparations should the worst occur. Everyone, hurry up and get on the aerial beast. Yi Wentian beckoned the group over. But at that moment, the ground trembled once more. Hong long long. The shaking was much more intense this time round. In that instant, it was as if the cleansing lake had been overturned. A searing heat wave gushed forth as though a majestic dragon from the bottom of the lake. Seeing that an explosion was imminent, Hongshe asked, "What will happen to Zhongshe if we were to leave like that?" "It's too late to save him, let's go," Yi Wentian shouted. Hong long. Before he could finish his words, a huge pillar of fire gushed into the air. Everyone felt a searing gust of wind rushing at them, burning their skin. It's too late. We can't get away anymore. Yi Wentian thought that they would at least have 3 minutes, but before they could even get onto the aerial beasts, the volcano was already erupting. A tight squeeze gripped his heart, and subconsciously, he closed his eyes, awaiting his imminent death. But after waiting for a moment, he realized he wasn't engulfed by the flames. Just as he was perplexed by what was happening, someone amidst the crowd suddenly shouted, "Wait a moment, look, why is there a person on the flames?" Yi Wentian quickly raised his head and looked over, only to see a man standing above the fire dragon. The other party had a sharp gaze reminiscent of a bolt of lightning. Amidst curious gazes, the other party took off his shoe and threw it casually. Gia. The fire dragon immediately withered. The clash among the energies from the verdant mountain, dragon-scaled river, and earth vein immediately calmed down, as though a balance had been achieved. Chapter 647. Yangsha reappears. This. Wei Shi and Yi Wentian stared at one another in astonishment, as though they had seen a ghost. Guild leader Wu's entire body was trembling non-stop, as if someone was grabbing his neck. His eyes were widened so much that they were about to pop out. It's the balance point. By throwing his shoe, he directed the energies to cancel one another out at the balancing point. The main difficulty with balancing the energies from the verdant mountain, dragon-scaled river, and earth vein was finding the balance point. Once it was found, it wasn't too difficult to re-establish a balance. Just that. Of all the things he had thought of that could resolve the situation, be it a formation plate, a formation flag, or some kind of formidable artifact, to think that it was a mere shoe that saved them from their impending doom. This was nearly inconceivable. How formidable must that person be to achieve such a feat? Who in the world was that person? Just as guild leader Wu was completely dumbfounded, unable to utter a single word, Hongshu and Luo Xian's lips trembled, and they hurriedly kneeled to the ground. Junior Hong Qian pays respect to Yangsha. Junior Luo Xian pays respect to Yangsha. The duo immediately recognized the figure as soon as he appeared in the air. It was no other than the man who subdued the alliance of the 14 strongest regional powers in Hongfeng Empire single-handedly, the supreme expert. Yang Xian. They thought that they would surely die this time, but who knew that Yangsha would actually appear at this crucial moment and resolve their crisis? At this current moment, Yang Xian was standing silently in the air, exuding a calm but unfathomable disposition. Yi Wentian, Wei Shi, and the others turned to look at Hongshu and Luo Xian questioningly. He is. They were all in the midst of dire trouble when the other party suddenly appeared and resolved the entire crisis with the toss of a shoe. Upon seeing Hong Qian and Luo Xian greeting the other party with utmost respect, they immediately turned to them for answers. Given how the other party was able to easily resolve a situation that was beyond them, it couldn't be clearer that the other party was a formidable figure. Hongshu swallowed a mouthful of saliva as he said, "This elder is Zhong Xian's teacher, Yangsha." Even Pavilion Master Mo from the Hongyuan Empire Master Teacher Pavilion has to respectfully address him as senior. Even though this wasn't his first time meeting Yangsha, the pressure which the other party exerted on him was still as powerful as always. This was especially so on his soul. He felt as though he was facing an immovable mountain, rendering him incapable of even conjuring the slightest thought of aggression. Even Pavilion Master Mo has to respectfully address him as senior. Zhongshi's teacher. Wei Shi, Yi Wentian, guild leader Wu, and the others narrowed their eyes, and their lips twitched violently. One must know that Pavilion Master Mo was a 6-star pinnacle master teacher, an expert who had reached sainthood. And yet, even a person like him had to address this person as senior. How strong must this Yangsha be? Furthermore, they had lost Zhongshi's body, and after the previous burst of flames, it was unlikely that even cinders were left of him. For his teacher to appear at this instant, how could they possibly explain this matter to the other party? If only they had known that the other party had such a fearsome teacher, they would have surely braved through danger to look after Zhongsha. The more they thought about it, the more nervous they became. Thus, the trio hurriedly bowed down. Huanyu Empire's Yi Wentian, Wu Zun, and Wei Jiang pay respect to Yangsha. With his hands behind his back, Yangsha stared down at the group coldly. If my student Zhong Xian has erred, you can reprimand and correct him. To leave him to fend for himself in the river, do you think that there's no one behind him? We dare not think so. Seeing that the other party had come due to this matter, everyone froze in fear. At the same time, they felt indignant as well. We really tried to save your student, but in just a moment that our attention was away from him, he leaped into the lake himself. The situation back then was simply too complicated, there was nothing we could have done. You'd better not. Harumphing coldly, Yangsha turned his gaze away from the crowd. He turned his hand to the cleansing lake and grabbed. An unconscious figure slowly rose from the water. It was Zhong Xian. Just by stretching his hand forward, this Yang-Shi actually managed to find Zhong Xian and fish him up. Despite grabbing through space, there isn't the slightest sign of energy ripple in his movement at all. Even a Saint Dan wouldn't be capable of doing so. Yi Wentian and Wei Shi glanced at one another, and their bodies trembled in fear. That movement might not seem like anything special, but as transcendent mortal 8 Dan pinnacle experts, they had a clear grasp of how difficult the feat was. They were also capable of grabbing something remotely through space as well, but to find grab a person over a distance of several dozens of meters from the huge cleansing lake without the slightest energy ripple. This was a feat that no ordinary man was capable of. Even Pavilion Master Mo Gaoyuan from Hongyuan Empire was probably incapable of such a feat. Expert. He was a true expert. Yi Wentian, Wei Shi, and guild leader Wu glanced at one another, and their bodies stiffened. There were some master teachers who were very protective of their students, and they would take it personally if one dared to bully their students. If Yang-Shi were to really settle this score with them, while they might be esteemed figures in Huanyu Empire, they knew that they were nothing to him. Gritting his teeth, Yi Wentian stepped forward. I apologize for failing to take good care for Zhong-Shi. I ask of Yang-Shi to punish me. The cleansing lake was a possession of Huanyu Empire's royalty, and he was the one who invited the others over as well. In a sense, the entire matter was intricately related to him, and he wouldn't be able to shirk his responsibility. Yang-Shi harumphed. Punish you? If I wished to punish you, do you think that you would be talking to me at this very moment? Flicking his wrist, the unconscious Zhong Xian came to a halt in midair, floating calmly just beside him. Upon seeing this movement, everyone's faces were drained of all color. Even without coming into contact with the other party, just by the energy he leaked, Yang-Shi was actually able to allow someone to float by his side. This was a feat completely inconceivable to them. The cleansing lake is formed by the energies from the verdant mountain, dragon-scaled river, and earth vein. If this power is not controlled well, it could result in mass destruction. As a master teacher, this isn't a sight that I wish to see, so I've resolved this problem for you. Glancing at Zhong Xian and noticing that there was nothing wrong with the other party, Yang-Shi's complexion alleviated slightly. Flinging his sleeves, he said, however, this incident has caused massive damage to the cleansing lake. It will take around 50 years before it can recover back to its original state. However, with the 3 energies in perfect balance, your cultivators can now enter the cleansing lake directly to cultivate. Since there's no longer any dependence on the lake eyes, the 10-year limit can be abolished. Can enter the cleansing lake directly to cultivate. 10-year limit can be abolished. Initially, when Yi Wentian heard that it would take 50 years for the cleansing lake to recover, he was slightly disappointed. However, when he heard that there was no longer any need to be dependent on the lake eye and that the 10-year limit was no longer applicable, he nearly leaped in joy. Even though the cleansing lake was highly beneficial to one's cultivation, the spiritual energy contained within was simply too violent. One could only cultivate in a lake eye, thus creating a natural restraint of 3 days every 10 years. Once this restraint was gone, given the size of the cleansing lake, a few hundred people would be able to cultivate simultaneously. Furthermore, there was no need for any interval in between. He could already foresee the exponential increase in experts in Huanyu Empire 50 years from now. With this, they would surely be able to rise to the top among Tier 2 empires. While it was impossible for them to become a Tier 1 empire with just this would surely bring their entire nation to greater heights. Thank you, Yang-Shi. Kneeling on the floor, Yi Wentian bowed in earnest gratitude. When something happened to the cleansing lake, he'd thought that Huanyu Empire would come to an end under his rule. Who could have known that this would actually be a blessing in disguise? Not only did Zhong-Shi's teacher resolve the issue, he even removed the previous limits on the cleansing lake. With this, the other party saved Huanyu Empire and granted it the potential to stand among the top of other Tier 2 empires. This favor was so great that there was nothing equivalent Huanyu Empire could offer. Seeing Yi Wentian kneeling before him, Yang-Shi waved his hands casually before walking on thin air into the distance. Zhong-Shi's body floated closely behind him. Soon, The duo disappeared from everyone's sight. To be able to bring another person along with him in a flight. Everyone swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Due to their limited cultivation, most people present here weren't aware of exactly how fearsome Yangsha was. Even so, the fact that he could settle the cleansing lake, even though it was on the verge of explosion, just by tossing a shoe and bring another person on a flight with him had left them indescribably shocked. No matter how dull-witted they may be, it was clear that Yangsha was someone they should never trifle with. Even though transcendent mortal 8-dan ethereal treading realm cultivators could step on empty space as well, they were only capable of vertical translation. In a sense, there wasn't much difference from leaping upward. Only upon officially becoming a saint and reaching 1-dan void pursuit realm would one be capable of true flight. But even so, this ability would only be confined to the individual. To actually bring another person with him so casually, the other party's cultivation was beyond their imaginations. Zhongshe actually has such a powerful teacher. Xing Yuan gulped down his saliva. In truth, he had been thinking of finding an opportunity to teach this brat a lesson so that he would never cause Princess Feiya any trouble in the future. But at this moment, he realized how foolish his thoughts were. It was fortunate that he didn't make a move. Otherwise, even his entire clan combined wouldn't be able to withstand a single slap from the other party's teacher. The gap between the both of them was this huge. Even though the strongest man in his clan, the old ancestor, was capable of flight as well, he knew very well that the old ancestor wouldn't be able to bring another person along with him so casually. It seems like I'll have to get on good terms with Zhongshe in the future, Xing Yuan thought. Zhongshe's teacher. Yu Feiya also widened her eyes in shock. It was no wonder Zhongxian was able to defeat her time and time again. It turned out that he had such a formidable teacher, with such a formidable figure grooming him. Even if she was an incredible talent, it was inevitable that she wouldn't be a match for the other party. Humph. Even if you have a strong teacher, I refuse to be your maid. Let's see who will have the last laugh. She gritted her teeth and clenched her fists. So what if the other party has a powerful teacher? I, Yu Feiya, am not one to trifle with either. Do you think I'll serve as your maid obediently? Dream on. If an opportunity comes, I'll surely defeat you in a bet and redeem myself. But at this moment, she suddenly recalled that she had just lost another 10,000 spirit stones. How frustrating. That's a relief. Seeing Yangsha arriving on time to save Zhongshe, Hongshe and Luo Xian each heaved a sigh of relief. Luo Chichi also came to a realization at this moment. She had been wondering why Zhongshe possessed such astounding knowledge in pill forging. However, Yangsha's presence explained everything. With such a formidable teacher, it was impossible for the student to be ordinary. The crisis in the cleansing lake might have been resolved, but given the current circumstances, we can't continue cultivating any longer. After seeing off the incredible Yangshe, Yi Wentian turned to Luo Chichi, Princess Feiya, and the others and apologized. He had invited them over to cultivate so as to get on their good side, but it turned out to be fraught with dangers, and they even almost died here. This was indeed a tragic failure. That's right. Everyone nodded as they turned to look at the ruined cleansing lake with twitching lips. At the same time, a doubt sprouted within their minds. Wasn't this lake supposed to be safe? Why would it suddenly act up? Chapter 648, Verdant Mountain. While everyone was staring at the cleansing lake with doubts in their mind, Yangshe, who had impressed all of them with his previous incredible feats, suddenly plummeted from the sky as soon as he got out of everyone's sight. Peng. Following which, pained moaning echoed. Slowly, the face of the majestic Yangshe slowly turned into Zhongxian's face. Can't you give me a hand instead of watching as I fall from the sky? Grabbing his spinning head, Zhongxian turned to glare at his clone in anger. Naturally, he was the one feigning Yangshe, whereas that Zhongxian was his clone. Back then, at the bottom of the cleansing lake, after absorbing everyone's zhenqi and the earth flame, he managed to strengthen his physical body considerably, thus allowing his 10-meter-large soul to enter his body. Only after this all was done did he realize that the cleansing lake was on the verge of explosion. In order to preserve his life, he immediately checked on the situation with the Library of Heaven's Path, and only then did he realize that he and his clone's action of absorbing all of the spiritual energy from the cleansing lake had disturbed the balance among the three energies, thus causing such a huge commotion. In an instant, he felt embarrassed. The other party had kindly brought him over to cultivate, but he actually caused their lake to explode instead. It was indeed wrong of him to do so. But honestly speaking, he didn't do it intentionally either. All of this had to be blamed on his clone. If not for that fellow absorbing the spiritual energy with all of his might, how could the balance have been disturbed? But it was useless to be pointing fingers now. If he were to run out and explain the situation to Yi Wentian now, the other party would probably kill him with a single slap out of rage. Left with no choice, he could only summon Yangsha once more. With this expert appearing, he would be able to openly resolve this issue, as well as compensate the other party for the damage. In order to make the entire matter more believable, he even instructed his clone to pass off as the unconscious him. This way, he would be able to brush off everything when he returned. He could simply say that he didn't know anything other than the fact that his teacher saved him. Given that the others had witnessed the previous sight, they probably wouldn't pursue the matter either. And of course, the method of flight that Zhongxian used was the red dust heaven ascending step. On the other hand, his clone was slightly different. As a god artifact, the Nine Hearts Lotus possessed the innate ability of flight, and this ability was transferred to his clone. With these two working with one another to put on the act, even Wei Yishuo, a 5-star high-tier master teacher, failed to see through it. Right after reaching this area, Zhongxian suddenly found his zhenqi being depleted. Due to the breakthrough his soul and physical body had just undergone, he wasn't able to gauge his zhenqi accurately. As such, his vision just darkened all of the sudden, and he plummeted from the sky. He thought that his clone would at least lend him a hand to help him land safely on the ground. Who knew that this fellow would simply watch idly as he crashed all the way down? Zhongxian felt so angry that he could explode at any moment. While he wasn't severely injured due to his physical resilience and the low altitude of his flight, he thought that his clone should at least share some of his burdens. What the heck was this? Remember, as a clone, you should rush forward when you see that I'm in difficulty. Just as Zhongxian was just about to give this fellow an ideology lesson so that he would learn his priorities, the other party slowly closed his eyes. It looked as though he was saying that it's not my fault that you're so dumb. Zhongxian spurted blood. Just because I said you shouldn't just watch as I fall from the sky, you closed your eyes. How in the world did I create a fool like you? The clones of others were fierce and loyal. When they saw their main body in trouble, they would immediately rush forward to save him. And yet, this fellow actually simply watched as the main body fell to the ground. Just the thought of it left Zhongxian lightheaded. What a darned clone he had. Forget it, let me see how much stronger I have grown first. Since he couldn't be bothered to lash out at this fellow, Zhongxian turned his attention to his growth instead. Under the nourishment of the earth flame and spiritual lake, his physical body had grown by leaps and bounds. At this moment, every single cell of his felt strong and flexible, as though they had just gone through a metamorphosis. Raising his arm, he sent a fist forward. Hong long. The might of his punch shot through the tree as though a fist-sized bullet, rattling the entire tree with its force. My physical body has grown this strong? Zhongxian's eyes lit up. In the previous attack, he used neither his soul cultivation nor his zhenqi, just solely the strength of his physical body. He wanted to see how much power he could tap into. He didn't expect the force of his punch to be able to create a gaping hole in a gigantic tree a dozen meters away. Even a transcendent mortal 5-dan consonant spirit realm cultivator would find it hard to execute this kind of attack. Just my physical body itself wields a strength of 2 million ding. Zhongxian's eyes lit up. With this, he had confirmed the might his physical body wielded. It was actually on par with his zhenqi, reaching 2 million ding. In other words, without zhenqi or soul energy, just by the might of his flesh itself, he could destroy a consonant spirit realm primary stage cultivator. Fearsome. What about my soul cultivation? After testing his physical body, Zhongxian raised his palm and drove his soul energy. Hong long. A small hill dozens of meters away was immediately reduced to dust. Even though the might is still capped at consonant spirit realm pinnacle, 3,200,000 ding, my stamina has improved. I'll be able to sustain my soul energy longer in a fight. Zhong Xian's eyes lit up. Even though Zhong Xian's soul had grown to a height of 10 meters, the might he could tap into didn't increase. It was still at 3,200,000 ding. What improved instead was his stamina. Making an analogy, if an ordinary human were to harness all of their might, they might be able to lift an object of 100 kilograms. However, that would be their limit, and they would need to rest for quite a while before they could do so once more. 3,200,000 ding referred to the maximum might one could harness in an attack. In other words, it was impossible for one to launch such an attack continuously without rest. However, as Zhong Xian's soul reached a height of 10 meters, the limits of his stamina were released. He was now able to launch attacks of 3,200,000 ding without tiring himself out. This was an extremely fearsome ability. If he could sustain a might of 3,200,000 ding in every single attack, he could even kill a Cosmos Bridge Realm primary stage cultivator. With 2 million ding from my physical body, 2 million ding from my zhenqi, and 3,200,000 ding from my soul cultivation, I can rival even a transcendent mortal 6-dan Cosmos Bridge Realm pinnacle cultivator in a fight. Taking a deep breath, Zhong Xian could feel overwhelming power flowing through his body, as though an undefeatable titan. Despite being at clarifying turbidity realm pinnacle, he already harnessed a might superior to Cosmos Bridge pinnacle experts, who wielded a might of 6,400,000 ding. There was probably no one who wouldn't feel excited at that thought. Come, let's cross fists. Chuckling lightly, Zhong Xian turned to his clone. Due to the limits of his physical body, he was sent flying by the other party's fist the previous time. However, with a breakthrough in all aspects, it would be difficult for the other party to do the same now. Perhaps, he might even be able to teach the other party a lesson and let him know the difference between the main body and a clone. His clone nodded his head. Gathering might in his fist, he punched forward. On the other hand, Zhong Xian gathered the might from his body, soul, and zhenqi, and in an instant, his strength was brought to its peak. With the current might he possessed, he felt that even a transcendent mortal 7-dan primary stage expert could be killed with a single punch. Boom! The two fists collided. A scream in agony echoed in the air. While his clone stood completely motionless on the spot, Zhong Xian was sent flying backward. His body tore through a dozen huge trees over a distance of several hundred meters before finally coming to a stop. Blood spewed profusely from his mouth. The heck? Did you need to be so vicious? He thought that with such a massive improvement, he would be able to easily teach the other party a lesson. Who knew that the gap between them only seemed to have widened? He had used his full strength, but not only was the other party completely fine, he also nearly died from the encounter himself. How could reality be so darned? Are you the clone or am I? Struggling to his feet, Zhong Xian glared at the other party. Your physical body is still too weak, so you aren't able to bring out the full might of your soul. Just as Zhong Xian was feeling displeased, his clone walked over with his hands behind his back, carrying an authoritative disposition. If you wish to defeat me, you still need much more practice. But of course, if you acknowledge me as your teacher, I can teach you. Scram. With a darkened face, Zhong Xian put that fellow straight into his storage ring. His clone actually tried to take him as a student. What was the world turning into? If you're that capable, why don't you try ascending to the heavens? That fellow's words might be infuriating, but he does make sense. After putting away the other party, Zhong Xian frowned. It was indeed true that his physical body wasn't unable to bring out the full might of his soul cultivation. While his physical body had made massive progress under the tempering of the earth flame and spiritual lake, the duration was too short. It was only sufficient for his massive soul to slip into his body. It still wasn't enough for his soul to fuse perfectly with his body and bring out the full extent of his strength. With a certain degree of incompatibility between my soul and physical body, I won't have precise control over my strength. A powerful soul needs a powerful body to house it. Otherwise, it would be like an adult taking control over an infant's body. No matter how powerful the adult was, It was impossible for him to bring out his full might through an infant's body. In fact, the difference between the strength of the two might even cause the adult to be unable to control his own strength precisely as well. This was exactly the situation that was happening with Zhongxian. Even though his soul had finally grown to be capable of housing his massive soul, it was still comparatively much weaker than it. As such, his control over his soul cultivation and physical body wasn't as thorough as it used to be. In a sense, it was similar to the situation when he first cultivated Heaven's Path Golden Body in Master Lu Chen's house. Although he didn't feel that he had used too much strength, he ended up sending Master Lu Chen flying with a touch. Just that this time, the lack of control worked both ways. His strength could be either much stronger or weaker than what he perceived himself. It seems like I'll have to train my physical body. Zhongxian massaged his glabella. The momentary tempering just now was clearly insufficient. It seemed that he had to hurry up and raise the strength of his physical body. Otherwise, if he were to suddenly have a burst of strength and a moment of frailty now and then, others might just think that he was a lunatic. Or else, I could ask Emperor Yi Wentian for some cultivation techniques for training one's physical body. As long as I can compile Heaven's Path Golden Body 3 Dan, my physical body should grow significantly stronger. As long as he had sufficient physical body cultivation techniques, his library of Heaven's Path would be able to form a Heaven's Path Golden Body, and he would be able to improve swiftly. Where am I? Only after deciding on his next course of action was Zhongxian's attention brought back to his surroundings. Taking a glance, he was stunned. This is the Verdant Mountain? Back then, he was in a hurry to escape as soon as possible, so he didn't take note of it, but it seemed like he had traveled a long distance away from Huanyu capital, reaching the depths of Verdant Mountain. Chapter 649, Heartthrob. A towering, winding mountain range filled with a light fragrance from primitive and foreign flora and fauna. Even though it was already deep into winter, the spiritual energy in the region was still filled with the vitality of spring. After taking a look, Zhongxian complimented his surroundings. This verdant mountain is indeed a blessed land for cultivation. To rise above innumerable kingdoms to become a Tier 2 empire, while having a strong master-teacher pavilion was important, so was attracting capable talents and possessing a good geographical terrain. Be it the Verdant Mountain or the dragon-scaled river, their lands carried a soothing atmosphere and gentle spiritual energy that boosted one's cultivation. Let's return first. After resting for a moment to recuperate from the injuries incurred from the previous fall, Zhongxian prepared to return to the capital when the leaves not too far away rustled. Shish. Following which, a massive armored bear tiger came into view. It was trudging forward warily in a certain direction. Zhongxian was taken aback. The armored bear tiger was an incredibly ferocious transcendent mortal 5-Dan spirit beast. Known as the autarch of the forest, even a transcendent mortal 6-Dan primary stage cultivator would find it hard to defeat it. This fellow usually hunted openly since nothing could possibly stand in its way. Why was it moving around carefully as though it was some kind of wolf? More importantly, since Zhongxian was able to see the other party should have noticed him as well, given its cultivation. Yet, it actually continued moving along its path, ignoring him entirely. This left some doubts in his mind. Let's see what that fellow is up to. Zhongxian's curiosity was immediately piqued. He leaped onto a tree branch and followed behind the armored bear tiger. Soon, the large fellow bent low, looking around his surroundings in alarm as it advanced slowly. Hoo. At a distance not too far away, Zhongxian could see a massive Grand Lion spirit beast. Just like the armored bear tiger, the Grand Lion spirit beast was a transcendent mortal 5-Dan spirit beast as well. Given that they were equally matched in strength and shared the same prey, they were usually in a hostile relationship. It seems like its nemesis has appeared. Perhaps these two are intending on assaulting one another. Zhongxian chuckled. He was still wondering what was happening, but it turned out that two nemeses had just met one another, and they were prowling around for an opportunity to strike at the other. I should pay careful attention to their battle. Perhaps, I might be able to learn some new techniques to infuse into my battle techniques. Zhongxian thought. Since everyone knew that he was taken away by his teacher, he was in no hurry to return. Such a ferocious battle could broaden his horizons, so it would be a pity to miss it. In fact, there were many incredible techniques that were created after watching spirit beasts fight one another. Squatting on a tree branch, Zhongxian watched as the armored bear tiger and grand lion spirit beast slowly approached one another. Before long, they had already circled around the shrubs and saw one another. Who? Zhongxian thought that a magnificent battle would break out instantly, but contrary to his expectations, the duo simply nodded their heads, seemingly coming to an agreement, before heading forward side by side. This. Zhongxian blinked his eyes in surprise. When did these two nemeses become good friends? Furthermore, from the looks of it, they seemed to be working in unison. Curious, Zhongxian followed behind them. A little distance away, the loud roaring of the wind echoed from above. A massive aerial spirit beast swooped down from the air. Transcendent Mortal 5 Dan Aerial Spirit Beast. Draco-Eagle Beast. Zhongxian widened his eyes in shock. This fellow was extremely famous as well. With steel talons that could even rip apart spirit intermediate tier weapons, it was given the majestic name of Sky Overlord. Even 3 of his demon sank beast wouldn't be a match for the Draco-Eagle Beast. Were these two spirit beasts working together to deal with it? But that shouldn't be possible. The spirit beasts on land and in the sky usually didn't cross one another. Besides, the other party was capable of flight, so how could the duo possibly attack it? This was similar to how a lion would usually prey on rabbits and deer instead of sparrows and crows. Since they were from 2 completely different worlds, there was no need for them to cross one another. Voila! By the time Zhongxian had recovered from his astonishment, the Draco-Eagle Beast had already landed before the other spirit beasts. Just like before, it nodded its head toward the duo, and as though coming to an understanding, the trio advanced forward together. The Draco-Eagle Beast is collaborating with them as well? Zhongxian's shock was gradually deepening. It was already baffling that 2 nemeses of the forest were working with one another. Now that even the Sky Overlord was cooperating with them, what in the world could they be up to? What could have happened for them to put aside their differences and ally with one another? SSSSSSSS. Walking on, the group stumbled by a massive python, a ferocious ape, a swift sparrow. Before long, more than 30 spirit beasts were gathered together. All of them possessed a cultivation of at least Transcendent Mortal 5 Dan, and given their natural advantages as spirit beasts, Zhongxian would have a difficult time defeating even a single one of them. Yet, so many of them were gathered together at this instant. Even a person as brave as Zhongxian couldn't help but feel his goosebumps rising in fear. It will be difficult for me to escape if they notice me. Zhongxian moved carefully in fear, afraid that he would accidentally make a noise that would catch their attention. His palm was drenched with cold sweat. If they were to manage to surround him, there was a chance that he would even be done in. Flying, crawling, running, slithering. There were truly spirit beasts of all sorts. Every single one of them possessed might that an ordinary Transcendent Mortal 5 Dan Pinnacle cultivator would find hard to stand against. Together, not even a 7 Dan expert would escape from their clutches. What is it that brought so many spirit beasts together? Are they going to fight an enemy? Despite the danger involved in this matter, Zhongxian couldn't hold back his curiosity. So many different species of spirit beasts were present here, and a huge bunch of them were even nemeses of one another. And yet, here they were, working together with one another. What could have happened? Could it be that they have found some kind of treasure? A thought popped into Zhongxian's mind, and excitement began to tingle within him. It was rumored that true treasures would attract the presence of countless spirit beast or even incur a stampede. Could these fellows be gathered for some kind of incredible treasure? That's not it. If it's a treasure, they would probably be fighting with one another over it at this instant. However, Zhongxian soon rejected the idea. There would be no one who wouldn't wish to claim a treasure for themselves. If that was truly the case, it would be impossible for them to work together, it would be a scene of bloodshed instead. No matter what, I should just watch on. The answer should unfold itself soon. Since he was already up to this point, He had to get to the bottom of the matter. Thus, he followed behind the group discreetly. Hualala. While he was following behind the group, a slight rustling sounded from the trees ahead, and a group of silhouettes appeared. Upon seeing those silhouettes, Zhongxian widened his eyes in shock. All that came before were all spirit beasts, but this group were all humans. There were 7 to 8 of them, and just like the spirit beasts, they had all reached transcendent mortal 5 Dan as well. There was a slight but distinct scent of blood coming from them. They are beast hunters. A name appeared in Zhongxian's mind, and excitement immediately overwhelmed him. A spirit beast's skin, bones, blood, and inner core were extremely valuable treasures to cultivators. In fact, there was even a market specializing in such sales. Given how lucrative the market was, there was naturally a group of people who specialized in hunting down spirit beasts and procuring the useful body parts, thus giving rise to a unique occupation, beast hunter. However, just like herbologists, the beast hunter occupation wasn't acknowledged by the master-teacher pavilion. It wasn't due to how cruel the occupation was, but that it had no complete heritage. Most people chose this life due to compelling situations, and as such, there were no organizations nor guilds regulating them and passing down knowledge. Furthermore, the death toll of this occupation was simply too huge. The hunters would often become hunted themselves, thus making it difficult to pass down their heritage. As such, it couldn't really be called a unique occupation. But even so, there was quite a number of them over the entire continent, and they were recorded in books too. Just that, this group of beast hunters had actually come together with the spirit beast. The beast hunters simply walked up to the pack of spirit beasts, nodded, and then they began advancing together. Beast hunters and spirit beasts were mortal enemies, and yet they were walking side by side at this moment. What the heck was going on? What should have been a great battle between the spirit beasts and the beast hunters ended up as though an amicable meeting among old friends. This was contradictory and bewildering. As the group slowly grew larger, in order to prevent himself from being noticed, Zhongxian could only fly amidst the lush leaves using the red dust heaven ascending steps. After advancing a little further, they arrived at the bottom of a waterfall. The water cascaded from a height of 3,000 kai, creating a deafening roar. A slight vapor rose from the bottom of the waterfall, nourishing the brilliant greenery in the area. Zhongxian was perplexed. It's the middle of winter. How come the greenery is so verdant? While the greenery in Verdant Mountain wouldn't wither due to the rich spiritual energy in the area, the color of the greenery would still darken in the middle of winter. But the greenery in this region had a bright shade of green, as though it was the onset of spring. This very sight was baffling. Could there be something special about this waterfall? Hualala. Beneath the waterfall was a massive lake. A white, furry spirit beast was swimming freely in it. That fellow was around the size of a watermelon, and its bright eyes only made it more adorable. This is a snow fox. Furthermore, it seems that it is a newborn. Zhongxian immediately recognized the spirit beast. Snow fox was an extremely rare spirit beast. It possessed nearly no offensive ability, but its inner core was exceptionally valuable. Rumor had it that it contained a unique energy that could allow both cultivators and spirit beasts to unconditionally raise their cultivation by a big rel. This wasn't just primary stage to intermediate stage, or intermediate stage to advanced stage, it was a big realm. In other words, it could allow a clarifying turbidity realm cultivator to reach consonant spirit realm directly. It was among one of the most sought-after treasures in the world. But a mere snow fox shouldn't require all of these fellows to work together though. The snow fox might be valuable, but considering its lack of offensive power, the armored bear tiger, grand lion spirit beast, or any of the other spirit beast could easily tear it apart. Why would they march here in such a large group then? Furthermore, considering that this was a newborn snow fox, surely these fellows need not proceed so warily. No, it seems like the one they intend to deal with is. Baffled, Zhongxian took a closer look and realized that the spirit beasts and beast hunters were looking at a specific direction. Tracing their gazes, he was taken aback. By the side of the lake stood a white-robed lady. She stood silently amidst flowers and grass, as if a peaceful painting. It was simply too tranquil that even with a soul as strong as Zhongxian's, he didn't notice her presence at all. As Zhongxian turned his gaze over, the white-robed lady also turned her face over. Her beautiful features seemed to meld together with the peaceful scenery. With just a momentary glance, Zhongxian's heart skipped a beat. For the first time since he arrived in this world, Zhongxian's composed state of mind was sent into disarray. Chapter 650. Saving her. Zhongxian had seen many beauties. Shunbai Ayu, Mo Yu, Zhao Feiwu, Yu Feiya, Luo Chichi. Even his students, Wang Ying and Zhao Ya, were beauties in their own rights. Among them, there were a few who bore feelings for him, and some even voiced their willingness to be with him. But Zhongxian's heart remained unmoved. He wasn't devoid of feelings, nor was he uninterested in beautiful ladies, he was simply unmoved. Since he possessed no particular feelings for them, he wasn't willing to get involved with them. He thought that it might be due to the library of heaven's path in his head. Perhaps the library had come together with the unfeelingness of the heavens. Never had he imagined a day would come where his heart would actually beat helplessly at the sight of a lady. It was as if the other party possessed some kind of quality that drew him in, leaving him with no choice but to leap forward. She was extremely beautiful, such that even Zhao Ya would pale before her. Even so, Zhongxian's mind wasn't so weak as to be assailed by mere physical appearance. But for some reason, this lady had an extraordinarily intimate presence to him. As if he had seen her somewhere before. I mustn't allow anything happen to her. Such a thought simply appeared out of nowhere. Prowling in the area were more than 30 transcendent mortal 5 Dan spirit beasts and 8 beast hunters. If they were to attack the white-robed lady, she would surely be unable to withstand their assault. Save her. This thought sprouted in Zhongxian's mind, and it was growing stronger by the second, compelling him into action. He didn't want to see this white-robed lady being torn apart by all of these spirit beasts. If I were to rush forward to save her, I would be surrounded by them before I could even reach her. If so, I would be dead before I could even achieve anything. While the thought had gripped Zhongxian's entirety, he knew that it would be foolishness to dive in without a plan. There were plenty of formidable aerial spirit beasts amidst the group as well. Even with Zhongxian flight capability, it would still be difficult for him to outrun them. Should I disguise myself as Yang Shi to scare this group off? After a moment of thought, Zhongxian realized that he couldn't find any better idea. Thus, he decided to resort to his specialty, hoodwinking. If he could frighten this group off, that would be for the best. Otherwise, he would have no choice but to face them. At the most, he would just have to call his clone out at that time to fight alongside him. While victory was unlikely, he was confident that he could at least get away. It's settled then. Gritting his teeth, Zhongxian refined the details of his plan before standing up. His muscles slowly shifted, turning his appearance into that of Yang Shi. Hualala. Right when he was done with his preparations, the spirit beasts finished circling the entire area. There was a bizarre glint in their eyes, and it seemed as though they would leap forward at any moment. I have to go in now or else I won't make it in time. Frowning, Zhongxian immediately flew straight toward the side of the lake, where the white-robed lady was. Humph! While he was in the air, a cold harumph resounded in the area. It sounded like the roar of a dragon, causing the entire forest to tremor. His soul energy and junchi were devoted to this harumph, and it carried a grandness that made one feel small in comparison. Accustomed to playing as an expert, Zhongxian naturally commanded an aura befitting of one. With his majestic demeanor, he resembled a deity descending from the heavens. The spirit beasts and beast hunters who were just about to pounce on the white-robed lady all halted their movements before his presence. While the intelligence of spirit beasts hadn't reached the level of humans yet, they were still no fools. Considering how the figure was able to fly in the sky, it was unlikely that they would be able to stand against him. Who? Seeing that his presence had made everyone stop for the moment, Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief. With a few steps, he walked to the aerial space right above the white-robed lady. From the current location where he was standing, he would be able to grab her and escape swiftly should the unexpected happen. Now that he was closer to the white-robed lady, he was able to catch a clearer look at the latter's features. She was a young lady of a similar age to him. She had a composed look on her face, seemingly unaware that she was already completely surrounded by many spirit beasts and beast hunters. With his hands behind his back, Zhongxian's gaze fell upon the spirit beasts and beast hunters. I am fond of this scenery, and I don't wish for blood to besmirch this land. Back down. After saying these words, he secretly sent a telepathic message to the young lady below him. Try to find a way to escape later on. Spirit beasts have already surrounded this area, and I fear that they mean you harm. However, after waiting for a while, Zhongxian still didn't receive the other party's reply. Glancing downward, he saw the white-robed lady looking at him nonchalantly. Could it be that she doesn't believe me? Zhongxian frowned. Those spirit beasts and beast hunters had approached silently, and they were currently hiding amidst the greenery. It was possible that the other party did not believe his words. Thinking about it, it wasn't too surprising. Given that a man had suddenly appeared and sent a telepathic message to her saying that the area was filled with spirit beasts, she would probably think that he was a lunatic. Do my words mean nothing to you? Knowing that he would only make himself seem less credible the more he explained the matter, Zhongxian decided to turn his gaze back to the forest, flung his sleeves, and roared, I told you to back down. Roar. Zhongxian's bellow had succeeded in inducing fear in the spirit beasts in the region. One of them unintentionally let loose a fearful whimper, revealing its presence. Knowing that the other party was already aware of their presence, the spirit beasts and beast hunters decided to step out of their hiding spots. Hualala. The might of more than 30 transcendent mortal 5 Dan spirit beasts and 8 beast hunters exerted an immense pressure on Zhongxian. Now you should believe me, right? They are intending to deal with you and your snow fox. Cold sweat dripped off Zhongxian's forehead as he sent a telepathic message to the white-robed lady. The white-robed lady seemed to be slightly astonished by the arrival of the spirit beasts as well. You don't need to fear. Since I'm here, I won't allow them to do as they please. Don't worry, I'll chase them off for you. Zhongxian reassured her before turning to the crowd. Are you certain you want to challenge me? Hong Long. A powerful surge of soul energy swept through the entire area. Zhongxian's cultivation might be ordinary, but his soul energy was superior to even the transcendent mortal 8 Dan Yuantians. With the release of his soul energy, the spirit beasts and beast hunters immediately felt immense threat. Pada. One of the aerial spirit beasts even lost control of its body and plummeted from the sky. A few spirit beasts also collapsed to the ground, unable to withstand the pressure. Seeing this situation, the tense Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed these spirit beasts were no fools. They knew better than to challenge an opponent beyond them. Roar. But just as Zhongxian thought that the group would back down from fear, a ferocious howling sounded. It came from the armored bear tiger that he first met. Hualala. Hearing the howling, the frightened spirit beasts immediately regained their nerves. They turned their gazes over once more. This time, it was filled with savagery. What's going on? It was just a moment ago that all of them were trembling in fear. Yet, after this fellow's howling, all of them seemed to have regained their fighting spirit. Zhongxian's face immediately warped in fear. Could it be that this armored bear tiger recognized him as the person from before? In the previous meeting with this fellow, his true cultivation was probably exposed. But even so, the person whom he saw previously was Zhongxian while the current him was Yangshe. How could the other party possibly recognize him? Roar. While Zhongxian was still bewildered by the situation before him, the armored bear tiger yelled furiously once more. Pushing its large paws against the ground, it leaped forward. This is bad. Zhongxian's face darkened. It was extremely clear that he had given himself away somehow. It seemed that his disguise still needed a little more work for it to be effective under the scrutiny of spirit beasts' astute senses. Even though they didn't possess intelligence on par with humans, they had sharp eyes and sensitive noses in exchange. Perhaps he had neglected an important aspect of his disguise that allowed the armored bear tiger to see through it. Or perhaps, it might be due to the lack of harmony between his soul and his body, resulting in his inability to hide his aura perfectly. With his aura leaking out, It wasn't too difficult for them to deduce that this expert was a fake. I have no choice but to fight them now. Seeing the large fellow rush over, Zhongxian knew that a fight was inevitable. Thus, he rushed in front of the white-robed lady and grabbed her hand. Run! Who? But before they could escape, the armored bear tiger was already right before Zhongxian. It swung its massive claws, and a sharp wave of might tore through space, heading straight for Zhongxian's arm. Damn it! Zhongxian's face darkened. The armored bear tiger was much stronger and faster than he had expected. The strongest aspects of an armored bear tiger was its claws and strength. Even though Zhongxian's physical body had been tempered by the cleansing lake, it would still be hard for him to clash with the other party face-on. Letting go of the lady, Zhongxian flicked his wrist and the glacier rain sword appeared in his palm. He immediately slashed it toward the other party's claw. Voila! The sword chi immediately covered a distance of several dozen meters and collided with the other party's attack. Boom! A loud explosion created two huge depressions of 7 to 8 meters deep. Zhongxian remained unmoving on the spot whereas the armored bear tiger was forced back. A shallow, white cut appeared on its body. Even though the armored bear tiger was one of the strongest even among transcendent mortal 5-dan spirit beasts, Zhongxian's soul, physical body, and zhenqi were simply extraordinary. Even so, the other party was indeed formidable. If it had been any other ordinary transcendent mortal 5-dan spirit beast, Zhongxian's sword would have surely split it in two. To leave behind just a single shallow white cut said a lot about the other party's fearsome defensive capability. Roar, roar, roar. However, the very survival of the armored bear tiger against Zhongxian showed that he wasn't sufficiently powerful to stand against all of them. The spirit beasts and beast hunters in the surroundings immediately realized that Zhongxian was just acting before. Thus, with a loud roar, they charged forward furiously. Su su su. Numerous arrows also came flying straight toward Zhongxian, the beast hunters. They specialized in long-range attacks, and their arrows were infused with dense zhenqi. Even from afar, astounding killing intent could be felt from them. Narrowing his eyes, Zhongxian felt his goosebumps rising up. There were aerial spirit beasts to guard the sky, land spirit beast to charge on land, and even long-range support fire from the beast hunters. If they managed to surround him, it would be difficult for him to break out from their encirclement even with the help of his clone. Flee! Flicking his wrists swiftly, multiple blasts of sword chi shot out to deflect the arrows. Following which, Zhongxian pulled the white-robed lady forward and leaped into the lake. Amidst this perilous situation, this was the only possible escape route. Chapter 651, Consonance of Soul and Body. The white-robed lady seemed to be unwilling to leave, but Zhongxian knew that there wasn't time to persuade her. Thus, he pulled her along forcefully. Putong! The duo fell into the lake. Seeing the two of them enter the lake, the snow fox also came swimming over. Let's leave quickly. Otherwise, we'll surely die. Grabbing the snow fox with one hand and pulling the white-robed lady with the other, Zhongxian yelled anxiously as he swam to the depths of the lake. He had examined the spirit beasts carefully and there were none that specialized in aqua combat. They would be much safer down here. Furthermore, this lake was connected to a river. It was possible for them to escape from their pursuers through here. Hula! Not too long after they swam down into the depths of the lake, a violent disturbance rippled from the top of the lake. There were a couple of spirit beasts who jumped into the lake to pursue them. Knowing that there was no time to be lost, Zhongxian drove his zhenqi, and they picked up speed. Based on his memory, he swam in the direction where the river was at. As Zhongxian expected, they were indeed much safer in the water. While there were some spirit beasts who chased them, he managed to ward them off with relative ease. Slowly, the number of spirit beasts decreased. After around 2 hours, they managed to shake off all of the spirit beasts. Only then did Zhongxian heave a sigh of relief and start swimming to the surface. Holding his breath for 2 hours wasn't too hard for him given his current cultivation. Turning to look at the white-robed lady beside him, it seemed that the other party was fine as well. Considering how the spirit beasts had to approach her so carefully, it was likely that her cultivation was on par with his. Who? As the beast and two humans emerged from the water, Zhongxian immediately scanned his surroundings. Only after confirming that there was no danger did he heave a sigh of relief. It's safe now. Zhongxian pulled the lady to the shore. After swimming for 2 hours, they were now a considerable distance away from the waterfall. Given the various splits in the meandering river along the way, it would be hard for the spirit beasts to track them down. However, it was best for them to be careful anyway. The other party did have aerial spirit beasts who specialized in scouting on their side. Let's find a safe spot, get some food, and dry our clothes. The three of them were looking rather unkempt after the long swim. Their clothes were sticking firmly to their skin. Zhongxian smiled bitterly. Knowing that Zhongxian had gone through so much to save her, the white-robed lady seemed much friendlier from before. Smiling, she nodded in agreement at his words. There were several large caves dug out by the spirit beasts in Verdant Mountain. It didn't take too long for the duo to find an empty one. Following which, they gathered a few dry branches and started a campfire. Only then did they feel their bodies warming up. Even with cultivation levels such as theirs, swimming for 2 hours in the middle of winter was still no joke. The chill felt like a sharp dagger stabbing at their insides. I am Zhongxian. You are. After drying his clothes, Zhongxian took out a few pieces of dried jerky from his storage ring and offered them to the other party. Following which, he reverted his appearance and clasped his fist. For some reason, this lady simply felt extremely familiar to him, as though he had known her all his life. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone through so much trouble to save her. With a faint smile, the lady shook her head. She took the jerky from Zhongxian's hands, tore off a small portion, and ate it. Her movements were extremely graceful and refined. You can't speak. Realizing that the other party hadn't spoken a word since they met, Zhongxian was taken aback. Until now, it seemed like the other party had been replying to his words with a smile. The lady shook her head. Is it due to some kind of persisting illness or, do you need me to treat you? I am actually quite a capable physician, Zhongxian said. There were some who would lose their voice due to injury or cultivating incorrectly. However, it was still treatable as long as one had the correct treatment method. Considering how he had read many books on medicine, and also had the Library of Heaven's Path to fall back on, it shouldn't be too difficult for him to treat the other party. The white-robed lady shook her hands. Are you afraid that I can't cure you, or are you unwilling to be treated? Zhongxian frowned. The lady continued to shake her hands nonchalantly. It seemed as though she was already used to being in such a situation, and she didn't want to be treated. Since that's the case, I won't talk about it any more then. Since the other party wasn't willing to be treated, Zhongxian couldn't possibly force his treatment on her. For some reason, sitting beside this lady made him feel extremely calm, drawing him away from the material aspect of life. Sitting silently, Zhongxian was searching for something, anything, to say when his face suddenly warped in pain. His entire body began shaking uncontrollably. Shit. Zhongxian clenched his fists tightly. Even though his physical body had grown much stronger after the tempering from the earth flame and cleansing lake, it wasn't sufficient for him to fully adapt to his massive soul. Thus, he should have avoided overexerting himself while training his physical body for it to adapt to his soul. Who knew that he would have met with this white-robed lady and end up overexerting himself? He didn't feel anything in the face of danger back then, but now that they were safe, he immediately felt a sharp pain in his soul as though someone had stabbed needles deep into it, and dizziness suddenly overwhelmed him. Using the shoe measurements in his previous life, his current soul was size 45 while his physical body was size 42. While he could still slip in with some force, he would still be injured should he walk too much. The current situation was as such. Even though his body and soul were incompatible with one another, he might still have been fine if he hadn't overexerted himself. But he did, and now he had to tolerate an insufferable pain in his soul. Honestly, Zhongxian wanted to leave a good impression on the other party by saving her, but such a situation happened instead. He couldn't help but feel a little stifled. Suppress. Zhongxian forcefully suppressed his soul to force it to adapt to his physical body. Who knew that the more he tried to do so, the the more violent the backlash became. It was as if the side effect of forcefully stuffing his soul back into his body was coming back to bite him all at once. Ah! With a roar, Zhongxian couldn't hold on any longer, and his soul began gushing out of his glabella. It was the previous problem playing up again, an overly powerful soul for a relatively weak physical body. Unless he could raise the strength of his physical body, the two wouldn't be able to fuse together perfectly. It's over. Feeling that his soul was about to leave his body, Zhongxian's heart turned cold. Actually, if his soul were to leave his body, he would be able to avoid such pain, but if he were to allow it to occur now, it would be as good as telling the other party that he was a soul oracle, and this would be difficult to explain. Even though the soul oracle occupation was a complete one, its heritage had already gone missing for many years, and it had officially been eradicated by the master-teacher pavilion a long time ago. In the view of most cultivators, they were a callous and mysterious existence. If the other party were to learn that he had such a sinister occupation, the goodwill that he had built up with much difficulty would definitely disappear instantaneously. What in the world was this? Of all the times for his condition to work up, it just had to be now. How would the other party view him after this? Would she think that he was up to no good? Just as Zhongxian was at a complete loss, the white-robed lady stood up and pressed on his glabella lightly. Hula! The soul that was about to slip out of his body was suppressed in an instant, and it returned obediently back into his body. At the same time, a unique energy flowed through his entire body, relieving it of the extreme pain it felt instantaneously. This. Zhongxian widened his eyes in shock. This was a problem which had troubled him greatly, and yet the other party resolved it with a single pat. What was this? Could it be that the white-robed lady possessed a cultivation far higher than the transcendent mortal 8 Dan Yi Wentian? One must know that not even Yi Wentian could resolve the problem of his soul going missing. Otherwise, he wouldn't have just placed Zhongxian on the stone table helplessly. Doubtful, Zhongxian was just about to ask about the issue when a pang of exhaustion suddenly struck him. His vision darkened, and he gradually lost consciousness. Amidst his sleep, he felt as though his soul and physical body were harmonizing once more, and the discomfort he felt previously gradually vanished. Sometime later, he woke up. Rubbing his eyes, Zhongxian sat up. Indeed, the incompatibility between his soul and physical body had vanished, and he felt much more relaxed than before. My physical body hasn't gotten any stronger, but my soul seemed to have undergone some kind of refinement. It has become much purer, making it easier to slip it into my body. Zhongxian's eyes lit up. Even though his soul was still 10 meters tall, it had become much more flexible, making it easier to enter his body and control it. I should give it a try. Closing his eyes, Zhongxian's soul swept through his body, and he could feel that every single muscle and cell was within his control. He could now perfectly move his entire body. Even before the affair at the cleansing lake, he had never felt such precise control over his body before. This is perfect consonance of body and soul. Zhongxian clenched his fists tightly, and his body trembled in excitement. At Transcendent Mortal 5 Dan, a cultivator would be able to harmonize his body and soul as one. This consonance would refine his control over his strength and body, allowing for more precise movements. Rumor had it that if this consonance were to reach the level of perfection, one would be able to look inwardly into one's physical body and repair the damaged regions. One's body would be able to become as flawless as a piece of white jade. However, even Transcendent Mortal 9 Dan experts would be unable to reach such a realm. Only saints would have a chance of accomplishing this. And yet, Zhongxian actually succeeded. In the midst of Zhongxian's excitement, a thought suddenly flashed through his mind, and he froze. But, if my soul and body are perfectly consonant, won't my soul be unable to leave my body? Typically, becoming a soul oracle meant abandoning one's natural body. As far as Zhongxian knew, no soul oracle had achieved a perfect consonance of body and soul before. If his soul and body were to be perfectly consonant while he was unconscious, would it mean that he had lost his ability as a soul oracle? If that was the case, then there was nothing for him to be happy about. Even taking the occupations from ancient times into account, the abilities of a soul oracle were one of the more practical and useful ones. For example, There would be no other occupation that would have allowed Zhongxian to absorb the spiritual energy from the cleansing lake earlier on. Thus, Zhongxian quickly drove the soul-guiding formula. Fortunately, he realized that his soul could still part from his body and move freely. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief. Sending his soul back into his physical body, Zhongxian stood up and looked around the cave. However, the cave was oddly silent. The campfire was already extinguished, and there was not a person to be seen. The white-robed lady whom he had saved previously had already disappeared without a trace. "Lady!" Zhongxian yelled. He was just about to go out to look for the latter when he caught sight of a line of neatly written words on the stone wall not too far away. "You have saved me once, and I have returned the favor. Thus, we are even now. There is still a long time ahead of us, so may we meet again in the future." Meet again in the future? Zhongxian was dumbstruck. She left. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.